Okay, we should be live. Dano, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Saturday, March 24th,
Fifth.
25th, 2023. And today we are
Hello,
going
hello.
yep. So this is Dano. Everybody should know Dano if you're, uh, yep,
Good
hold on.
evening, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well.
So,
We s-
Dano, tonight we're going to talk. I've titled this the Death of the Evil Empire. And we'll get into it. We'll get into exactly what that means in a minute. And I've sent out some requests for some guests to do cameos for 5-10 minutes here and there, or longer if they like, just to get some input.
Yep.
And basically, I think I think most people are now starting to see, starting to feel what you and I have been talking about for over 10 years.
Yeah, I
Okay.
would.
And so, do you want to just recap for everybody what this last week has done as far as the visit from? I don't know if you saw the prep video I did last night, but basically I tried to talk a little bit about this. But I'm interested in what you have to say here. So I don't know if I'm locked up. You're on mute, Dan. I can't hear you. This is the beauty of live broadcasting. Well, I'm in Mexico City, and the Wi-Fi here can get pretty spotty. Dan, can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. I can't hear you at all. Let me see. Dan, why don't you try exiting and coming back in? Okay, let's wait for Dan to come back in here. I'm going to post this link onto Twitter here. As I said, I would do that. I just hope it's not my connection because I noticed last night with the video that it was a little bit grainy and a little bit in and out. Okay. Well, I don't know what happened to Dan. There he is. No, I can't hear you. You were fine just a few minutes ago. Let me make sure. And you can hear me fine. How about now? Okay, how about now? Oh my God. Dan, are you there? Say something. Yeah, I unmuted you, so I don't know why you're not coming up. You're not muted on my end, Dan, so it has to be your end. Let me see if I can hear myself on this stream. And basically, I post this link on the Twitter here. This is the beauty of live. Dan, you there? Say something. I'm in Mexico City. I don't know what's going on. Yeah, why don't you try it? Okay, I told Dan to start his computer, so hopefully restart his computer, so hopefully that does it. It's always something. All right. Dano, you there?
Can you hear me now?
Can hear you now.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
You can't hear me?
I can hear you. Absolutely.
Okay, fine. Yeah, there's a little bit of delay, so
repeat.
obviously, yeah. So there's a little bit of a delay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So let's get into it. Before this thing went bananas, so the NSA, what Dan has to say is so powerful. The NSA is shutting them off.
Okay, let's not hopefully get overly ridiculous.
Okay, so I'm going to sit back and I'm going to ask Dan what his thoughts of the last week were, because I let everybody know what my thoughts were last night. So the floor is yours, Dan.
Okay, well, I guess well, I guess in terms of the current state of affairs, to sum it up for over a week, as you've just said, uh, it's been a darn interesting week for sure. Coming off last weekend, everybody knows what happened with last weekend, the debacle with two or three major banks, and then I guess them having emergency meetings over the weekend, them being, I guess, the Fed, the Janet Yellen types, the Jerome Powell types, and then leading into Monday. And then, of course, bringing us into Tuesday and Wednesday, in which Jerome was to make his announcement as to, what was going to happen with interest rates. We here, amongst, I guess, Dave and I, sort of were forecasting that he's not going to go. Our gist of it was he wasn't going to go more than 25 basis points. He couldn't go more than 25 basis points, period. End of story. And I also think that going forward, sooner than not, as a whatever general thesis, that they may be pivoting sooner than you think. They're painted in a corner. Now, one thing I will note is when Jerome was speaking this week, right, Dave? Was it Tuesday or Wednesday? But when he was speaking, Janet was speaking at the same time.
That was Wednesday.
I thought, delivering her message. So I just found that interesting. Does it have significance? I don't know. I do know that, like, the message he was giving versus the message she was giving sort of seemed to have conflicted a little bit, right? So, he was telling us things were kind of okay and robust and stuff like that. She, on the other hand, when being grilled by the Oklahoma senator, was like, he was saying things like, well, can I count on a lot of banks in my state, particularly the mid-sized and small banks being okay? I mean, are they going to be okay? And she basically answered it in, sort of rhetorical language to say that we're going to look at stuff basically at a case-by-case basis, and that if we deem a particular bank, essentially not being big enough, what I mean?
This is where it goes back to, is the banksters, okay, the hedge funds, the big banks, they have always relied on the Fed to give them the wink, wink, nod, nod to tell them which way the market was going to go.
Right.
Okay. And 2 years ago, Jerome Powell pivoted down to zero interest rates, and he specifically said that it was going to be this way for at least 2 or 3 years. So I forget how far out, but it was way out. And so what he did was he had the banks buying short duration government paper. And so they did. And what happened is when he pivoted and when he started raising interest rates, these guys were locked into this short interest. And then the risk on that is when they start getting people coming in for their money, they have to sell these things and they have to take a loss. And that's what was happening. And what caused the panic was these banks started to realize that they needed liquidity. And so they went out and tried to get funding, and that's what created the panic. So, yeah. Now did you mute yourself again? Well, you're gone again. You're gone again. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. You're gone. I mean, you're there, but I can see you. I can't hear you. So you need to get a new computer. Yeah. I don't know what happened. Unbelievable. Okay, so what we're talking about is basically what's happening right now is yeah, it's could this be a big nothing burger? It's possible. You know, this whole what's been going on in our country has been going on for 20 years or longer. But it really started to, all right, let me see if I can get Dan back. Nope. Nope. Can't hear you. Try restarting again. Try rebooting. All right, well, Dan's gone for the, he's going to go reboot. So, how you doing, Zodi? Okay, let me see what your comment is here. Saudi Arabia and Iraq with China in the middle. Well, I don't know what to guess as far as, I think what's more, yeah, Saudi Arabia is involved because Saudi Arabia is directly linked to the petrodollar. And if the petrodollar goes bye-bye, then the dollar as the world reserve currency goes bye-bye. Because now people don't have to convert their currency. So if Argentina wanted to buy oil, they have to right now buy dollars and use dollars to buy oil. If Saudi Arabia now says, well, you can use gold or you can use Chinese yuan, then you don't need the dollar. Yes, it's happening right in front of our eyes. And I referred to it last night. Xi Jinping, the leader of China, he was just in Russia. And they already have a game plan. You know, here's the difference. The people who are running the United States and Western Europe and Australia and Canada and some other countries, they are flying by the seat of their pants. They're trying to use an old paradigm. Okay, Dan, you on or you off here?
How about now?
Yep, can hear you. Did you change
Perfect.
computers?
I changed computers.
Yeah, that computer, that's a piece of garbage, whatever that is. So, but hey, it happens. That's electronics for you.
Sorry.
So anyways, yeah, I was just answering Zodi's question. And yes, and this is why whatever's coming out of the mouth of Yellen or Biden or Fauci, Fauci's in my head, or Powell, even Fauci too, even Trump, they're all liars. They're all going to feed you misinformation. It's what I referred to last night. They're all part of the same club, as George Carlin likes to say. George Carlin used to say it's one big club and you and I aren't in it. So they're going to tell you what they want you to say. It's like the Titanic when they locked everybody downstairs to drown because they didn't want to deal with them. And they were the fifth class steerage. So they said, well, they're too poor to get in a lifeboat. So let them drown. We don't have enough lifeboats. Nice guys. And they aren't nice guys. So, all right, Dan. So you were saying, so I was just asking the question if the question was, is everything happening right in front of our eyes? And yes, it is. But most people are too busy watching. Hey, isn't it March Madness right now? I don't know. It's March. I don't follow it, but
No, I don't anymore. I don't follow sports anymore, although I grew up that way, but in playing them, whatever. But you touched a cogent point or whatever. I just really feel like, when I'm walking around in my community and whatever, look, you know, I'm not looking to be dogmatic. I'm not looking to have people, operate in fear and walk around on eggshells. But at the same time, I feel like just the average bear, and I'll take my own family, for example, members of my own family, um, in particular, let's say my folks, baby boomers, they have no idea. They don't have any idea. I don't think the rank and file. I think there's a portion. I think people are starting to wake up, particularly because of the internet and technology and social media, how we can share information easier and quicker than ever before. So that's all helping. Um, you know what I mean? But I still think that a bulk of it seems like at least the bulk of the U.S. populace. Uh, I just, like you said, Dave. I think they're. I don't know. It just we've got a lot of big problems, systemic problems, particularly financially. The printing that's gone on, messing with the interest rates. Now the banks. Now they want to do their CBDCs. On and on and on. And at the same time, we're pointing the big finger at Russia and China. It's like, is anybody noticing these things? I mean, this is big stuff. This is big stuff, guys. Hello.
Well, I'm trying to be as understanding about this as possible because I used to be like that. I mean,
Right.
it when I was younger, I didn't understand any of this,
Myself included.
and
Agreed.
I have no idea why you and I now can see it when we couldn't before. I don't know. We've talked about it. I don't know what specific. I mean, 9/11 was a big one for me, but
No, I
if
didn't.
if
Yeah,
if if you're so busy that you're on a treadmill and you're like, I got to take Jack to hockey and I got to take Janie to school and I got to make their lunch and I got to do this and I got
that's
to go
what
to
it is.
work, then people like don't bother me with this. I've got too many things on my plate,
Yeah.
especially if they're divorced and they have three baby daddies and have to interchange all that stuff.
Well, so great point. So, like, I was talking to a family member a couple days ago, and tangentially or in a peripheral sense, we came across the economic stuff and the bank failures and stuff, and it was like the response I got was like, why even bringing that up? Just worry about your own life. Just worry about the stuff you got to do, your job, your family, everything you just said, Dave. But the reality is, maybe I'm myopic or naive or a leadhead. That stuff affects us all. That's the point. Like what's going on now affects us all. I don't know how else to say it. We're all immersed in this fishbowl, if you will, or ocean together. Okay. And it affects us all. The bank failures, the decisions that are being made, by the Federal Reserve, which astounds me. The name in and of itself is a total misnomer. There's nothing federal about it. It's not part of the government whatsoever. My understanding is that, and if you go out to the website and poke around and read it, it's basically a privately owned entity in which you've got 11, 10, 11, 12 people on the board or whatever. Okay. Half of them European. And the holdings and stuff are private in nature, yet they control the money supply of the United States of America. And it's not really an American entity. Hello. Nobody's noticed that in the last 115 years.
And they collect a 6%. Um, what's the insurance term there? A 6% premium or commission
Yeah.
on everything printed. They get 6%.
Okay. Yeah. All right. There you go. I wasn't aware
An
of that.
annuity, 6% annuity.
Okay. Great.
So if you go to any city that has a Federal Reserve building, do you notice how big and how large and how nice their Federal
And
Reserve building
grandiose
is?
they are. There's 13 of them, I think, guys, in the United States. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Dallas, maybe Atlanta. I can't name all 13.
Minneapolis.
But essentially, guys, what you need to know is, in a nutshell, it's centralization at its best. The founding fathers dealt with this issue early on. You had the Alexander Hamiltons of the world, which was a huge proponent of that. And a lot of the other founding fathers were not. They thwarted it because they saw the tenets of it. But yet somehow it got
power corrupts. Power corrupts.
Somehow it got slipped in 1913 with Woodrow Wilson and company, who also brought us NATO, by the way. So,
I think on Christmas Day too, when everybody was gone.
And the interesting thing about that is that in his memoirs or something to that effect, Wilson said that two or three of the biggest regrets he had was bringing that in, the Fed, allowing federal taxation, and I think NATO.
Right, League of Nations.
Those were his words. So, now spin forward 80 years later, 90 years later, whatever. And, I just think that, and I'm not trying to be critical, and I'm learning every day too, if most Americans had a clue as to how our system worked, the financial system, and sort of how it was backed and how the inner workings actually worked. And even just the banking system, like if you go deposit $1,000, guys, in the bank, I'll bet you most of you aren't aware of this. They're not required to keep any of that money in the bank. So 2 minutes later, after you make a deposit of $1,000, they can loan it out like tenfold. They don't have to. They used to be fractional reserve banking used to be, I thought, 10%. And during the Trump administration, for whatever reason, he knocked that out to zero, Zippo. So I go into the bank tomorrow, Bank of America, I deposit $1,000, and technically the next day that $1,000 is not in the bank. It's already been loaned out upwards of tenfold. Now, how do you? I'm a meathead.
We got Brian coming in, Dan.
Yeah. How do you loan a literal $1,000 out 10 times? How do you do that? How do you do that?
Yeah.
Unless you virtualize it somehow, right? You know what I mean? Virtualize it.
We have the one and the only joining us.
Hey, gentlemen.
Brian, welcome.
I don't know how the sound is on your end. I am admittedly outside enjoying the nice weather here.
Yeah, I heard motorcycles.
That's smart.
Hey, you can answer this question that just came up from Zodi. I don't know if you can see it on the screen. He says, he or she says, I would love to know how much gold the USA really holds in Fort Knox.
Well, the conspiracy theories say that there's none.
Right. And it's been going down since the 70s that I've heard, and maybe
you're not supposed to know. How's that? Is that a better answer?
Well, if we actually had the amount of gold that they say, then they'd actually let people see it, right?
Well, it's not been audited in how long? My understanding, like 40 years, 50 years?
Oh, no, since the 50s.
My bad. There you go. So like 70 years.
Yeah.
Like a lot of things, I used to have a very strong opinion on things, and now I'm just to the point where I can't control any of it. I don't know what's true. I don't know what's a conspiracy theory anymore. I don't know what's a valid conspiracy theory anymore.
Well, let me ask you, can I share with what you used to be on YouTube? Is that okay?
I'd prefer not, if you don't mind, at this point, but that I was on YouTube. That's cool.
Okay. All right. Yeah, he was on YouTube, and that's how I met him. Not on the dating site, but on YouTube as a caller, because we don't do that. But
and you were in, I want to say you were in Hong Kong, weren't you?
Yeah, Hong Kong. Yeah.
That was a fun conversation.
Yeah. You were in the middle of a hurricane.
Was I? Wow, you have a great memory.
Well, I was like, because you didn't come back. You're like, Dave, you want to man the fort for 10 minutes while I talk to my wife? And he didn't come back. And I'm like, my God, is he dead? Did he go away?
I was wondering if the bad connection was on your end, not mine. Considered your location.
But he's got a memory almost like a woman.
Oh, God.
Remembers everything.
Well, hey, listen, in this day of age, he might be.
I'm not even going there, but because that's not what we're talking about.
All right.
But
Yeah. Don't
Not at
distract us.
all. Not at all.
We were talking about gold.
yeah. Well, no, actually, I'm curious because you're younger than Dan and I.
Not
but-
much.
Well, yeah.
I'm grayer than you are.
Well, that's
I
because you
would be
grow.
great too if I was showing hair on my face.
Well,
Trust me.
that's what I was just about to say. That's the one place where my gray hair shows up is on
Right.
my face.
By the way, you look good, David. Looks like you're not eating very well. I'm sure you're eating really well where you're at.
Oh, the food down here is fantastic.
I bet.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
I don't know why you look so thin, but you look good.
Oh, really? I feel like a slob, but that's another topic for another day. But actually,
By the way, you wearing a hoodie? Because normally when I see you, you're wearing a hoodie.
Oh no, not today. It's too hot. Too hot. But Dan and I were talking about this, and I'm just curious of your opinion because I haven't had as many conversations on this with you as I have with Dan, because Dan and I have been talking about this for 10 years. But when I was younger, I thought that the United States, was like John Wayne, and we were the good guys. We stood for the good in the world. And
Right.
my view has gone 180 degrees since then. I truly believe, and I get it. I mean, this world, if you look back at the history of man, it's a brutal world. I mean, people kill each other. And so maybe that's how the United States government decided that they have to be. They have to be like, carrying the big bat and be the bully on the block. And too bad, so sad for everybody else. But, when we were younger, there was always the facade that we were the good guy. And now that facade's gone. Facade's gone, at least to me.
I've never traveled abroad other than a cruise, down in the Bahamas and some islands. So I don't know what other what other worldwide citizens think of the United States, but I'll put it this way. I say this a lot. If we're the freest country in the world, then it must not be fun to be anywhere else. I'm not saying we are. It doesn't feel like we are, but I don't know how to measure that, right? So you've traveled so many places, Dave. So, I can only trust anecdotally what you're saying. I mean, the premise of your question or your comment is that we're not favored in the world. So I just wouldn't know that. But I hear the propaganda, I hear the conspiracies. I have to work really, really hard in not believing them, testing what I can test, and living out a life through a worldview that is as built as closely as possible to, for me, biblical values and of course, the founding of the nation of the United States of America. So I will say this. I don't think our nation looks anything like it used to. What do we blame? I don't know, except that, I was an educator for many years, and I remember hearing a presentation that, knowledge used to double. General knowledge used to double every, let's say, 50 years, maybe a generation, couple of generations. Then it was like, wow, now it's 1 year. And then I heard it was like 6 months, and who knows what it is now, general knowledge. And the problem is I don't think we as humans are equipped. We are not equipped for the rapidity and the volume of information that we receive. And so therefore, I think that if there is a master plan, the master plan is to flood us with information so that we're impotent, not only in action, but we become impotent in thought. And so I don't know if that's sort of answering your line of thinking here, but I don't know. Does that mean the United States appears to be the greatest place on earth, and we don't realize, like the frog in the boiling water, we don't realize where we stand? Like what's the reference point? Your premise is that the reference point's when we grew up. Yeah. I will say this. I would agree. I mean, but I was in a kid's mind. You remember me saying this, I feel like we are children in aging bodies. Like inside, yes, I've matured, but inside I still have that child soul. And I'd like to say that we are not progressing as a nation, that we are backsliding as a nation. And I would think that many markers could prove that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Before you go, Daryl, welcome. And
How are you?
good. Hey, for everybody who is just, Brian, I've known Brian, I don't know how long it's been. It's got to be 10 years, maybe?
Yeah, roughly 8 to 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years. And Daryl, I've known probably, 4 years now? Yeah. And so these guys are both really good people and really honest people. And they're not, they're going to tell you what they think. Whether you can handle it or not, that's your problem. And that's what I love about both of them. And so what we were just saying, Daryl, when you joined, is I was saying that, the United States, I called this podcast, "Is This the Death of the Evil Empire?" Because it almost feels like the Star Wars movie where, as a kid, I was like, oh, wow, this is the United States. We're John Wayne, we're the greatest country. And then as I've gotten older, I realized that whoever's running our country are evil. I'm not saying the people of the country are evil, but whoever's running us, whoever the powers are that be. I mean, look at Julian Assange is in a prison, for crying out loud, for trying to do the right thing. So, and before that,
who's in a prison? Who?
Julian Assange.
Assange. Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, look what happened to Snowden. I'm just dropping into the middle of this conversation, and I heard Brian talking about age and how he sees himself as a child in an aging body, or his perception is still youthful. And I think that's what it is, because awareness is always, if you're growing, it's always youthful. If you stop growing, then it ages really quickly. I mean, it's like bad fruit. All right. And so, for the reference of this group here, or for the listeners, I'm 78. And that doesn't give me anything, nor does it take away. It just frames my perspective. And I came of age in the 60s, which was sort of famous. It was radical what happened in the 60s. We went to the edge. And I know that everybody's looking at the United States police state. They're talking about, we know what a police state is. Right. Your generation knows it conceptually. You don't know what a police state is. We do. I mean, what's his name? De Tocqueville, that French philosopher who came over here in the 1830s. The United States was 40 years old then. I mean, that's really young. All right. And he came over here. He's a French nobleman. And he just wanted to observe what was going on in this new country, because we had the first thing that was called a democracy. A democracy had never existed before we came up with it. It's sort of, Switzerland has had sort of like that. All right. The Swiss states. And, but basically the Western reality in the East, it was always one man kings or tyrants, or, either it was a good tyrant or a bad tyrant, and usually it was a bad tyrant. All right. So here democracy came in the United States, and he came over here to see what was going on. And he wrote a book called Democracy in America. And he said that he believed that we had within our form of government the seeds of tyranny. All right. This is 1830.
Back then.
Wow.
And he also said, he made some incredible observations that I believe border on a knowledge base that we don't operate off rationally. 1830, he said, someday the United States and Russia will be on opposite sides of the world stage. I mean, communism didn't come around to 80 years later. We were just this starting off, and he said the United States and Russia will be on opposing parts of the world stage. And what he meant by democracy, the seeds of tyranny, he said it'll happen because under the guise of majority rule.
And the majority will not see it as a tyranny because they're
Right.
the majority. But when you have majority rule and the majority wants something that oppresses a minority, the majority never thinks it's tyrannical.
Mhm.
They just think it's the way it should be, no matter how odious it is. All right?
It's like the two foxes and the lamb voting on what's for dinner, right?
Yeah, you got it. So in the real life scenario that happened to my generation, right now, you guys, we're all sitting here watching, and pot is going to become legal, maybe someday, really legal. All right? You can smoke it now without going to jail in certain places. Other places, you're still going to go to jail. Still going to go to jail. All right? There are people in prison today that are probably in 40 years. Wrong state, wrong time, wrong system. All right? The war on drugs rolled a huge amount of Americans into prison. That's when we became a police state. So when I hear this generation or people talking about the government, they're going to take away our rights. Fuck you.
Yeah.
You know?
You're right. You have a different perspective because
I have a
you lived. It's what I talked about last night, Daryl. If we were the Highlander and we've been around for 800 years, we would have a different perspective.
absolutely. And the truth is, context, in which context gives the truth to everything. Because we, like the three of us on the screen right now, we have different backgrounds, different perceptions, different astrology, different whatever. Our views are a reflection of that context that each of us holds different. And each of us has a different contribution to this conversation because of our different context. All right. Now, what in the going back to the police state that the United States is still in to a very great degree. I mean, because that shows it. Right now in 2023, oh, we're on the way to legalizing drugs. And there's still some people here for various reasons that would like them to be illegal. Okay? Granted, who I don't care what they think, they would still like to throw people in jail for smoking a joint. All right? Now, I believe that during the heyday of it, most people didn't care. You know, most of the people that did nothing had smoked a joint, but they weren't certainly going to stand into the state and say so. They weren't going to show up, stand up, quote, for freedom, whatever, because freedom is not an abstract term. Freedom only has meaning in the particular. Freedom only has meaning when there's an absence of freedom to balance it against. And the war on drugs was incredible in this country. What happened? All right? And how it came into being was there were no federal laws, drug laws, basically before. All right? There were state laws. And then President Nixon comes to power and starts the war on drugs. And 20 years later, Ehrlichman said how it happened. He said, you know what? He said, we had two enemies in the 1970s, the Republicans, black civil rights leaders and anti-war hippies. Because the hippies were against the war in Vietnam. The hippies were against war. Mm-hmm. You know? Hey, peace. All right? And he said, you can't throw people in jail for being against the war, and you can't throw people in jail for wanting civil rights, but you can throw them in jail for drugs. All right? So this massive thing happened in this country. A real police state happened in this country, and it's only abating now. Only abating now. I mean, you go on your news feeds and you see things about MMD. People use that for PTSD. Psychedelics used to, whatever they are for alcoholism. You know, that's what was starting in the 60s. That's what was happening in the 60s before the government came in and shut it down and made it illegal. That happened to my generation. So as we're coming out into this, that's where my perspective, I'm not saying that this has nothing to do with freedom vis-a-vis other countries or things. I'm just talking about something that I believe in the conversation no one gets. We ignore it. You know, all these people, oh, freedom, they're taking away. Fuck you. And that's just because I've done time. My generation has done time.
Well, I guess what I would say to all that is that even though I was born in the 60s, the mid 60s, my understanding of the history to this point, definitely the 60s was a turning point in this country, right? That much I do understand. I mean, things started to happen then, right? That didn't happen really
Before.
Ever
before.
before. Right. And that absolutely was a turning point, I believe, in our country's history. And then, you had, I think you could argue, maybe as early as the early 60s when they killed Kennedy, for example, right? Because, to touch on your point with the hippies and stuff, what were the three or four tenets of the Kennedy platform? I believe till this day, it was an inside job, right? One of the things he said is, I'm pulling us out of the war, Vietnam, right? A second thing he said was that he didn't like, I think, the Internal Revenue Service, I think.
No,
he talked about that.
No.
I think a third thing he talked about was backing our paper money by like silver or something, right?
This is what, Dan, let's roll back.
Well, when he said that shit 60 years ago, he was way ahead of his time.
Way ahead of time. Yes. Now,
the powers that be were probably like, oh my God, this guy's out of it.
This guy is a danger
crazy
to us.
Right?
I believe, the Kennedy
and spin forward to now.
Yes, it's all a story. I mean, the Kennedy's father, Joseph Kennedy, was an old bootlegger.
Exactly.
Mafia boy. Not mafia, but he rolled.
Yeah, they were running alcohol.
They were all up there.
During Prohibition. That's where he made the core of his money. His nest egg or whatever.
Yes, nest egg. Now, what happens is the thing about silver that you brought up and the assassination.
Yeah.
One of the first acts that John F. Kennedy did when he was elected in 62.
Yeah.
No, 62. I think. Yeah, 62, 61, 62.
Was it 61? Yeah.
61,
yeah.
He issued since 1913, the only dollars issued in the United States came from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve did not exist before 1912.
Exactly.
All right. So they came in, and before the Federal Reserve, the U.S. Treasury used to issue all the money.
Right. Which is what the Constitution says. Only the government
you can't do it.
Can create money.
You can't do it. Okay. Yeah,
That's what it says.
It was unconstitutional. All right.
Right.
But my belief about the Constitution, about all things like the Bible, is all based on interpretation. And you can lie about it and use it as your basis. All right. So big deal. But anyway,
not to interrupt real quick. I mean, isn't that pretty literal when it says in the Constitution only the federal government shall issue currency? I mean, that's just literal.
That's there.
Yeah.
And they rolled it over. They ran because it's political power. They had the votes.
Right.
They had the votes. All right. And it was the bankers that did it. The bankers pulled it off. Okay. Jekyll Island. That's what it is. The bankers did it. Because it was in their best interest to do so. So since 1912, only the Federal Reserve issued the US dollar. The difference between the dollars issued by the Treasury and the Federal Reserve is the dollars issued by the Federal Reserve were instruments of debt. They were only issued through central banks as loans. After 1913, debt became the basis of the US dollar. It never was before. All right? Before then, it happened for the first time in England in 1694. The Bank of England, when they took over issuing England's money, they issued it from a central bank as a conveyance of debt. All right? This led to one of the tenets of the American Revolution. All right? Thomas Jefferson said his fight was to keep debt-based money out of the United States. Alexander Hamilton wanted to bring it in.
Exactly.
Alexander
He was a
Hamilton.
centralist. They fought
he
over
was,
this.
he was a government boy.
Yeah.
Power.
Centralization. That was his
Centralization.
middle name.
Yeah. See, the beauty to me, and this is only my personal perspective on the Constitution. The Constitution was the first time that a government was set up that tried to limit its own self.
Right.
Vis-a-vis the people. The Bill of Rights were the rights of the people regarding the government.
Right.
That's what it was. Never before had any government been formed with that basis. Anybody who ever took the reins of power only wanted more power. They only wanted more power.
Right.
But the people who started this country, it was truly revolutionary.
It was with the countermeasures.
Oh, it ran
built
against
in.
everything.
Right.
Everything in history before.
You know,
right?
the three branches, etc. Right.
Yes, everything. Oh, they just tried to bust it up so we couldn't get in our own way.
Exactly.
All right. And it basically worked for 200 years. And then
let me interject if I can.
Yeah.
In your opinions, do you think we would be better off without the Federal Reserve at this point?
You know, it's sort of like saying, would it be better if the air is pure? Well, yeah, but it doesn't matter. What we've got is what we've got. And that's what I want to frame in this conversation, where I think we're headed. All right. Of course, we'd be better off without the Federal Reserve. Of course, the world would be better off without personal evil and selfishness. Of course, it would be better if the golden rule, not the rule of gold, was our basic premise. Okay. And what we've got against the backdrop is human nature. And well, let me pull back to the thing about the Kennedy. What he did within months of his inauguration, because the Kennedy boys said their father, bootlegger as he was, bless his soul, Joseph Kennedy, hated the Federal Reserve. Hated him.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Oh, the Kennedy kids grew up with a deep suspicion.
Okay, so got it. I can see where that root came from.
Okay. Yeah. So Bobby and John both hated the Federal Reserve. All right. So they get into power. I mean, they're there. What the hell? I mean, the big thing about him was he's Catholic. And that's how different it is today. Oh, the Pope's going to run our country. Oh, damn up, Calian. You know, people were still back in that old paradigm. He squeaks through, gets elected, and one of the first things that the Kennedy administration does is issue the Treasury, not the Fed, for the first time in 50 fucking years.
Certificates, right?
The US dollar. $20 million in silver-backed bonds, in dollars, backed by silver that the U.S. Treasury still had.
Right.
All right. Boom. Less than a year later, bang.
Shit show.
Had blown off.
Yeah.
Back in the thing that day.
Yeah.
The Secret Service was somewhere else. You know, they changed the path. They went, you know, it was done in Texas, good old Texas,
right.
You know, good old Texas.
Well,
if you're gonna,
the same guys guarding Epstein.
Well, yeah, and so to me that it was such a pivotal event, and that helped pave the way, in my view, for the rest of the '60s, and then into the '70s with Nixon. And you remember, Daryl, probably very well. I think it was August 15th, 1971. I asked my parents for fun one time what they were doing that night. I said, "Do you remember?" I did. I was 5 years old then. I asked them later as an adult, what they were doing. And what I was getting at was, because my parents are boomers, Daryl, what I was getting at with them was, do you remember Nixon being on TV that night for 10 minutes or whatever it was, telling the American people that we're going off the gold standard and that it would be good for us? And right.
Yeah.
And they didn't remember. And so I'm not trying to point fingers.
No.
But that generation, that, they dropped the ball. They
things
dropped the
that
ball. I mean, nobody fucking noticed what Nixon was delivering to them. That was pretty big. He, in effect, was saying in indirect terms and colloquial terms, okay, we can now, because we're going off the gold standard, open up the spigots and do whatever we want
and do whatever.
in terms
Yes,
of printing.
but you
And-
see, but
And
even
it didn't
that,
apparently
no,
reach
well,
anybody
Dad, the truth is
in their defense.
the truth is, a democracy is no more guaranteed of good rule than any other system. Why? Human nature.
Right. Agreed.
All right. Now,
Totally.
I graduated with a degree in political science.
Yeah.
I never took an econ course in my life.
Right.
That's why the fact that I got a reputation in economics is really sort of funny. You know, I never even wanted to,
right.
but it was all to me about power. All right.
Absolutely.
Power. Now,
100%.
100% it's power. Okay. And that's why Woodrow Wilson was the one who okayed the Federal Reserve.
Right.
Okay. He's a Democrat, but this is why he did it. He was opposed to the bankers. Democrats never liked the bankers. Okay. He was opposed to them. But Woodrow Wilson wanted the League of Nations.
Right.
He felt that the world's got to come together on some sort of basis.
Yeah, he was sort of an ideologue, from what I understood.
Oh, well, he was an idealist.
Yeah, idealist. That's what I mean.
He was very much an idealist.
I think he meant well, but I don't think he was realistic. He was a Princeton boy, I think. I forget.
Yeah. And so he wanted a better world. And he thought, well, of course, the Republicans weren't going to, they're opposed. They wanted us and the rest of the world. All right. They're not going to put the votes in for that.
Yeah.
What they did was this. In return for Woodrow Wilson signing off on the Federal Reserve, they gave him the votes for the League of Nations.
Oh, there you go.
Okay? Shifts, quid pro quo, power. This thing happened. All right? Irrespective of whatever. Now, so history is rolling forward. And now it's rolling down fast. Like you said.
We're all suffering. All those decisions, we're feeling the manifestations today. Don't you agree?
Today.
In so many ways. 100 years later.
Yes. Now, I want you to frame where we are now like a movie. And we said you go to a movie and you're watching it. You don't know the fuck. Maybe you heard about it, but no one knows. If you knew what was happening in the movie, you really wouldn't go.
Right.
So you're in there, and the pieces start coming together. Because what happens is when it reaches resolution, when the guns are all, or whatever happens at the end of the movie, and then it's all makes sense. Then what happened then makes sense when this is blah blah blah. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's all in line. Before then, it's hindsight. Okay, and hindsight is always changed when you end the movie. All right, when you cut it off, cut. All right, now you're right. What this is like, and I truly believe it. We are in, and the United States is only a piece of it. I believe we're I used to make the metaphor. When you write a sentence, the sentence is like it's a beginning to end and a period, and it's a thought that's finished. It starts, it's done. Few words, you're finished. Okay. Then a paragraph. A paragraph is a series of sentences about an idea that's and basically, if you know how to write, the ending sort of ties back to it's coherent. Then you start another paragraph. Okay. The chapter finishes up a whole bunch of those paragraphs. The book finishes up all the chapters. All right. The last chapter should finish up all the chapters, brings to resolution. We are in not just the last chapter of the last book of where we're in. We're in, my belief, the last book of a series of books.
Right.
Okay. I mean, like volume 1, but what we're dealing with is a historical resolution of things that, whether you came in at your point, or whether you came in at my point, or you came in at Woodrow Wilson's point, or the Kennedy boys' point. Okay, it's bigger than all of us. Bigger than all of us.
Oh yeah.
Okay, and we're a part of it. Now, Kennedy died for what he did. I believe it.
Absolutely, in my view.
Yeah.
100%.
Boom. Okay. And and so here we are. And I want to explain to you about the gold standard thing, but pulling this off the dollar, I mean the gold discontinuing it. Why that happened, Dan? Why we went off the gold standard in 1971 is because we no longer had enough gold in our treasury to back the US dollar. The reason why the US dollar became the world currency was because of an agreement made in 1945.
Bretton Woods, yeah.
Bretton Woods. And we had all the gold. We had more gold in the world than Croesus had back then.
True.
Now,
yeah.
Now, why did that happen? That happened because in 1933, FDR confiscated all the U.S. private holdings of gold.
That's right.
And devalued the U.S. dollar against gold. Now, let me explain to you why that happened. Why that happened is in 1933, we had the Great Depression started in 1929. All right. And it went to hell. I mean, the game broke. The little credit and debt Ponzi scheme of the bankers of debt-based money blew up. Now, the British had that game. They started it in 1694 and wrote it for all it was worth. They ruled the world in 150 years. Now, we all know about the soccer hooligans from England. They're a nasty group of people.
Absolutely.
But as a small island, why in the hell did they end up owning the world? It wasn't because the Brits are better at stabbing each other in the back. You got the Turks out there. What the hell? I would hate to see a bar fight with a bunch of, drunk Englishmen and a bunch of mad Turks, blood all over the place. England ended up owning the world. Why? Because of their debt-based money. They were the only country that go to war on credit. The only country that can go to war on credit. All right? They took over the world. And they were really careful with this goose that laid their golden egg.
Right.
Because they took away everybody else's egg. The United States was the only one that got away from England. The only one. They chewed up the rest of the world.
That's true. Good point.
The Ottoman Empire, Turkey had an empire. The Ottoman Empire.
400 years.
Yeah. But it ended when the goddamn British Navy rolled in with their guns.
1918, it ended.
Yeah. And they called it free trade. Fuck you, free trade. You know what free trade was? You got to take our paper money in trade.
Yeah.
That's what we call free trade.
At the other end of a rifle if you don't like it.
Yeah, absolutely. And they rolled after Turkey. They were going after the two biggest pieces on the game. Russia and China. Huge feudal societies. Like outmoded.
Absolutely.
But huge. They'd gotten India already. All right. And now they're going after China and the United States.
Brutalized India.
Russia.
Brutalized them.
Brutalized India. Now, what happened is no one had any answer for debt-based money because it gave you an advantage nobody else had. No one. All right? No one. There was no answer for it. You either were going to die on your knees or stand up. The United States, we were an anomaly, not only the way we started, but how we escaped. They didn't come over to take over. They wiped out the Indians. But other than that, there wasn't a nation there that was going to, they thought this was theirs. So the revolution happened with their own settlers, with people from England who were living over here hundreds of miles away from the king, and go, hey, this is pretty good. Hey, we don't got that asshole looking over our neck.
We don't need this dick bag, and let's stop
taking our money and tell us.
And this for the taxes.
Absolutely. So we had a revolution. The Constitution came out, and Thomas Jefferson said two things. There were two enemies to our country's freedom. He said this in 1774. Two enemies. Private banking and the military. Standing armies.
He nailed it.
He said, if you have private banking, if you let the bankers in, we will end up them owning our homes and kicking us out.
which is
Okay?
what's happening
Which is
today.
happening today.
And then the military-industrial complex.
military-industrial
tried to warn us in 1960, just before Kennedy, by the way.
Yes, but by this time, the aggregate power structures in America were too strong to be opposed.
Right.
Too strong. All right, no one could stand up to them. That's why the idea of would we be better off without the Federals is true. We would be better off, but you can't stand up to them. They're too big. They are going to fall, but not because of what you and I do. It won't be. It'll be history. They're already falling. Banking. 4 banks fell in the last week and a half. 4 more coming. Okay. Now that's the core of banking when the banks fall. Okay, that's the core. So it's already
right. And it's going to be Russia and China that initiates the change, probably.
No, I don't. We're all pieced out on this thing. Okay, the Chinese and the Russians, their only virtue, they were the countries that escaped. They stood up physically to the West, to banking. All right, they were so different. And how they responded to the banking was, they knew banking was fucked. Marx was right. He knew what would happen. The fact, if you brought Karl Marx back from the dead, take him in out of his unfrozen, put him up on a screen and said, Mr. Marx, this is 400, 300 years later after you wrote. Does it surprise you that the 1% own everything on this planet? Not at all. Because that's what he was talking about. Debt-based money gave the bankers an advantage over everyone, including labor. Because labor and everybody else is a widget in their game.
Exactly.
All right?
Cog in the wheel, baby.
Yeah. Now there was no alternative to central banking, because what they did, and there was no alternative that worked. It was central banking's heyday. Nothing was going to stand up to it. And so what the Chinese and Russians did, called communism, was even worse, turned out to be worse than capitalism. Even more draconian. They came up with a solution they thought that would save them from the fucking bankers, and it turned out worse for everybody. Why? Why did it turn out worse? Because the threat from the West was so bad, they had to react quickly. They couldn't have people vote. They were going to be chewed up in a matter of. The West was on their door.
Oh, got it. So there was no time for democratic appeal whatever it's called.
Yeah, there's no other way to do it.
There needs to be action right now. Put the other shit to the side, guys.
Yeah.
Or else we're going to get steamrolled.
Yeah. And they had no solution. There was no other alternative economy. The economy they had was feudal-based, agrarian. Basically they couldn't stand up to it. So what they did, because they needed immediate action, they centralized all power.
Right.
Which is the worst of all possible worlds.
Exactly.
In response to a crisis, communism was exactly the opposite of what the American experiment was. The American experiment was trying to diffuse centralized power and give people freedom so they could get on with their fucking lives without a government on them, which is where it all came from before. And in Russia and China, they responded quickly by mobilizing everything. So you had economic power, ideology, everything crushed into one. And so one central thing ran the fucking thing. And I tell you, there was a quote by a Frenchman. He said, if you want to see a person's character, person's character, don't give him money, give him power.
Excellent. That's true. Right. Because if he gets abusive out of the gate and starts punching everybody out, you know what you're dealing with.
Or if he comes out of the gate and becomes abusive, you know what you're dealing with. That's what most people do.
Right.
They don't know, and they get it. And this happens in everything. It'll happen in a church. It'll happen in your PTA.
Right.
It'll happen in a corporation. It'll happen in crypto.
It'll happen in your kids' friggin' play group
Yeah,
when they
yeah,
duke it out over the fire engine.
absolutely. So what happened is you had this huge centralization of power leading to immense suffering of their own people. Immense suffering in the guise of doing good, in the guise of fighting off this evil bankers. All right. And because that's what happened. So but I want to get back to what you brought up, David, about China and Russia being the success. I don't believe it. I believe where we're headed for is, and I want to tell you something. Before I got into money, I was into wondering what the hell was going on. All right. And my wondering was, of course, based in power. I went to law school. I was in the 60s, radical. Okay. Power, 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 power. To me, what really amazed me about the United States was the Republican Party. How a political party that only benefited the 1%, all right, the real power, could maintain power in a democracy. That's stunning. Absolutely stunning. All right. Now, what happened to this? Because there's no pure ideology. There's only tendencies. That's all there is, and time and context. In the 1960s, the Republicans were like, they had this image, sort of of a male running things the right way. Like, we're in control. We knew right and wrong. We're not going to be fools like the Democrats. We're in control. We're in control. You can trust us. We're solid. Okay, we'll keep you safe. We're solid. And the Democrats were this strange amalgam of the outsiders, the labor movement. They had labor movement. Okay, and not only did they have the labor movement, the real basis of the party wasn't economic. The real basis of the party, of the Democratic Party in the 1950s and the early 60s, was the South. Remnants of the Civil War. The Southerners hated the Northerners, and they hated the bankers. These were the Republicans. They hated. It was in their blood. They never forgot what happened to them, and they were bitter. All right? They were bitter. Now, the South also represents the most reactionary religious fundamentalist part of the United States. And socially. There, slavery was cool. And in fact, right now, you see the news, shit happens in the South that shouldn't be happening on this planet. And we all know it. And the fact that it's going on there doesn't mean it doesn't happen anywhere else. But they've gotten away with shit that is rather amazing. All right? And you had the religion. Southern Baptists. All about sex. All right? Now, I want to say something about Southern Baptists. When I was growing up in this country, my family I'm part of the American Baptist movement. They weren't fundamentalists. They were more like the Methodists. Okay? We go to church. And then I heard about the Southern Baptists, because the American Baptist Convention used to be the only Baptist group in the United States. The Southern Baptists came out of somewhere. And the reason the Southern Baptists came into being was slavery. Slavery. They broke away from the American Baptists of the Civil War. All right? So, as you guys were growing up, the biggest religious influence in this country of what we consider Christianity was the Southern Baptists. Boom. Pious, church-going, faithful. These were the motherfuckers that used to pray to church and sell black people after the barbecue. Didn't miss a beat. Didn't bother their little Christian souls. All right? Now, so what happened is, in the 60s, as you were right, Dan, it all changed. The 60s blew everything
Oxford State, whatever, 62. Kennedy was going to send the
State.
National Guard
Yeah,
down to Mississippi.
Yes, it all blew apart. Okay.
Yeah.
And the Democratic Party, of which the Southern Dixiecrats were its core, this core could not take the change because the change was not accepted of the hippies. We had no home. I mean, we were just fucking, I gotta say, I understand how people reacted to us. All right. I mean, we were over the top. There was no way they could understand who we were, what we were doing, what we're saying. All right. I mean, boom. And then on top of that, women's rights and civil rights, the era of change, the 60s. By the time the 70s came around, what its first victim was the Democratic Party. This change could not be accepted by the Dixiecrats for absolutely understandable reasons. The Southerners were the most conservative socially in this country. Totally. Women, race, and hippies on top of it. It's all wrong. So when that happened in their fucking party, the party that was their home, the Democrats, they started bolting from the Democratic Party. What the Republicans did, they saw this. Now, who were the Republicans? The bankers and the military industrial complex. That's who they were. All right? Now, and they have trouble maintaining power because their interest group is only the top 1%. So they need those people at the bottom part who vote on their side. So they started going, come to daddy. Come to daddy. Now, the truth is, the biggest issue for the sexually shameful and repressed Southern Baptist and religious element in this country is women's freedom and abortion. All right? Now, let me tell you about what I know about the Republicans, the rich boys in New York. If you are a rich boy in New York, banker, let's wait for one of the Astors, all right? And your daughter gets knocked up by the Mexican gardener, all right? Your wonderful gardener. And let's say, you got to say, he was cute, all right? But God damn it, not on my watch. Your daughter is going to have a totally safe and legal abortion within weeks, if not days, over once you get done with the fight, if she wants to stay in the will. That's just it. They had no problem with abortion. All right? They always had access to it. But when they started bringing in the South, the Dixiecrats, that became their thing. All right? That's when you saw the Bushes aren't Texans until recently. They're out of Connecticut.
In New Englanders.
New Englanders. They ended up in Texas. Bank of America. They ended up in Charlotte, North Carolina. All right? I mean, this is not by mistake. And George Will, that little prick, he was right. George Will, little bow tie, old establishment Republican, he said something in the early 90s that really frightened me because he was right. Not because he was wrong. He was right. You know what he said? As a Republican, we owe a debt to the 60s and the hippies. We owe a debt. They were the ones that broke open the Democrats. They were the ones that we got all these votes coming to us. What happened is that but the Republicans, the rich boys, never intended to cede power to the new base that was coming in. They never intended to give them real power. They only wanted their votes. One of the greatest fears of the Republican Party has been for a long time is to have the abortion issue come to a vote. Because they knew if push comes to shove, they're on the losing side. They knew this in the 80s and 90s. And today, I mean, look what happened last year in Kansas. Up and down vote. No, abortion, you cannot have any laws. So they're trying to get about it the other way. They always knew that the American public was for the women's right to choose. But what happened is they used these issues, these hot button issues, to entice the disaffected and the angry in this country. And there was a lot of disaffected and there was a lot of anger. When society starts changing, everything gets stirred up. Everything you thought was once true no longer is. The familiar disappears. And when the familiar disappears, you become resentful, you become insecure, and you look to the past for the answers that you hope the future is going to come, and you can't. Those answers are gone. They're gone. But that's what is human nature. And that's what's led to this huge shift that we saw with the Tea Party. The Tea Party was America's answer to that disaffected group that had been jerked off by the Republican 1%. And 5 years later, 6 years later, Donald Trump took advantage of it. He spoke their language. He didn't speak their language. He said the words they wanted to hear. They wanted to hear somebody say those things. And he did, because he didn't give a fuck except for their votes. And it worked. And this country is in.
Yeah, well, let me ask you a question. What is the worst? I mean, if we actually truly adhered to the Constitution and allowed individuals and states? So if Mississippi wanted to make abortion illegal and they wanted to make marijuana illegal and California wanted it legal, isn't that the whole point?
Let's take it further, David. Let's say Mississippi wanted to reinstate slavery.
Well, there's certain things you can't do.
Why? Why?
Well, hey, that's fine. Hey, if you want to gladly choose to be a slave, Daryl, I mean, in many ways we already are.
Those slaves never were willing slaves, David.
No, I know that.
And the oppressed are never willingly oppressed.
Well, let me ask you.
But human history, you always have the oppressed. And
who is the oppressed today?
I would say, everybody thinks they're the victim. If you looked at America, if you looked at what we see in our landscape.
Yeah, it's the middle-aged white man now, right?
No. Everybody thinks they're the victim. And they blame somebody else why they're the victim. All right? Why they're the victim. The middle-aged white man feels like a victim. Why? Because only a generation ago, white sat on top of everybody. And the male part for centuries around the whole goddamn world has been on top. I mean, the West was wonderful compared to its oppression of women. No rights, no money rights, no marriage rights, no educational rights, compared to what they'd done to them in the goddamn China. They used to drown the girls when they came out. Look at it. What is it, boy or girl? What? Blah, 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 blah.
Like what they do to certain animals too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have them on the farm.
Absolutely. So, everybody, and I'm not saying some people aren't more oppressed than others, but I understand why white, male, middle class feel they're today's oppressed.
Oh, well, that was a joke. That was a joke.
But they do feel oppressed because of where they once were.
Everything's relative. Absolutely.
Everything's relative.
But yeah, it's well, since Russia and Ukraine a year ago, since Russia crossed into Ukraine, it seems like the whole thing has
David, it added an element to change that we didn't need. Right? It added an element to change that we didn't need. But when it happened, a part of you went, oh, fuck. Like,
Yeah. And
now
that's
we got
why I
this.
say, and that's why I say Russia and China, that in my opinion, and of course it's just my opinion,
Yeah.
they could be the catalyst for the end of the US dollar tomorrow if they wanted to.
They want to. They can't quite pull it off yet. All right? They can't quite pull it off. The truth is this. We've gotten tremendous benefit by the US dollar becoming the world reserve currency.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, what I was talking about before, I want to tell you how that happened. When FDR made private ownership of gold illegal in 1933, it wasn't because he had a boner against rich people, though the rich will tell you that. All right. And it certainly wasn't, it did what fucking, he did it because the Treasury told him, we don't have enough gold anymore to back the dollars that are out there. There used to be a term that described gold monetarily, and the term was golden fetters, Fetters. Those are like golden handcuffs. They hold you back. All right? What that meant, David, and that wasn't my term. That wasn't your term. That was a term of economists about gold and money.
Yeah, limited what they could spend.
It limited to what they could print.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If you had a stable economy, and that's what it was, it limited the amount of dollars you could print. All right. Now, in a central banking system, a dollar is not a piece of savings like it was before. A dollar represents debt because it's all issued in the form of debt, credit. All right. So when you kept the monetary base constrained, you also kept the amount of debt limited. But the people who play with money never see it as debt. They only see it as an advantage because it gave them more leverage. The ones who end up holding the debt are the ones screwed in the end.
Yeah.
The bankers and the ones playing at the top of the game are playing like they're dancing on it, and as soon as they create the debt, they bundle up and sell it off.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to be stuck holding it. Your bank that gives you a 30-year mortgage doesn't end up holding your mortgage.
Yeah.
It bundles it up and sells it off to an insurance company or a pension fund. Some other lower end sucker on the game.
Yeah, and that's probably who's gonna fail next.
That's who's going to fail next. So the boys at the top never will want to end up holding the bag of debt. What happened is the gold used to just control the amount of dollars you could print. What happened in 1933 is we didn't have enough gold to cover the dollar by the laws that we had set up. And so that's why 1933, FDR issues a proclamation making gold illegal for private ownership. All right. At that time, the price of gold was
$20, right?
Yeah, 20. Okay. And then what happened is when they took it away from everybody, they raised the price.
Right, like 50%.
Okay. So like
Yeah.
you and I had cows, all right? And we had 100 cattle apiece. And the going rate for a cattle was $100. And the United States goes, all right, can't own cattle privately anymore. Give it to us and we'll give you $100 for it. All right. So we had to give it. They came in, rounded up our cattle, took it away from us. They gave us $100 per cattle. And then a month later, they said, okay, the price of all cattle is now $140. All right. All right. To make it worse. Well, what that did, David, was that all of a sudden, everybody else around the world could get $140 for their cattle instead of 100.
Mm-hmm.
This is 1933. The world was going to war. So all of a sudden, after 33, gold started flowing in the United States from all around the world because of what FDR had done. Now, he didn't intend that we'd end up with all the gold. It was short term. He only did it to get us out of the trouble. The bankers said, You got to do this, Franklin. We don't got the gold to cover. What do you suggest I do? Fucking confiscate it. You know, can't buy it.
Yeah.
So he did it. 1949 rolls around. The United States has 21,775 tons of gold. More gold, way more gold than anybody else in the world.
Yeah. And the rest of the world was destroyed.
Was destroyed. And that's how we started the Marshall Plan. We reflated everything. Our dollar was backed by gold. It was convertible. And we ended up running the whole goddamn mess before you guys were born.
Yeah.
Okay? When you were born, unfortunately, by the time you were a kid, the United States had fucked it up. The 21,775 tons of gold in 1949, when Nixon shut the gold window, it was down to between 7,000 and 8,000 tons.
Well, that's the question we were discussing right before you came on board. Do you think there's any gold in Fort Knox?
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
There's not much.
Yeah. I don't think it's as much as they say.
No, and they haven't had an audit of it in 40 years,
Yeah.
a real audit.
Did you ever see the movie Dumb and Dumber? Probably not.
This is it.
Yeah.
You got it.
Jim Carrey found all this money, and at the end of the movie, these criminals who he took the money from said, "Where, you know, they get guns in his face. Where's the money?" And he gives them the bags, and inside there were all these pieces of paper saying, "I owe you, I owe you," and he's like,
Yeah. That's what it is.
I'll pay you back. I'll give it. My IOUs is as good as money."
That's exact. See, Fort Knox didn't hold IOUs. At one point, Fort Knox held a huge amount of gold.
Yeah.
All right. The reason why the gold was gone, we had a positive balance of trade with the rest of the world between 1949 and 1971.
Right.
That's the only way gold moved, to balance out trade. And if you have a positive balance of trade with another country, that means they owe you gold. You get more gold because they bought more shit from you than you bought from them with dollars, or dollars, francs, you want, whatever. So by 1971, we should have had more gold than 21,775 tons. The United States should have had over 30,000 tons. We were king shit in the whole world.
Guns and
We
butter,
had
baby. Guns and butter.
What happened was this. We had armies and navies all over the world, and we had to pay for their upkeep. And we paid with dollars. The biggest military peacetime presence in the history of the world. The U.S. military presence after World War II was the largest peacetime. Before, you only had armies geared up because of war. We went on a constant war footing. The upkeep of that machine was enormous, and we underwrote the expansion of U.S. corporations all over the world. Factories got put in, U.S. factories got put in all over the world, funded by the Ex-Im Bank, which the United States gave U.S. corporations discounted money to build elsewhere. All of it was done on U.S. dollars, which were turned into the treasury by those countries where the factories were, where we had our armies, where we had our Navy base, and the gold started coming out, moving out, faster and faster and faster. And we blamed it on the French. Why? Because, that's how it is. Blame it on the French. They asked for that. It was the fucking Brits that were asking for the gold too in 1971. And Nixon didn't know shit. Politicians never know shit about this stuff. They don't care about it. But when he was confronted with the fact that there was going to be a run on gold and we're going to run out and it was going to fuck the game up, he said, what do we do? What do we do? And Milton Friedman, the darling of the right wing, Friedman as opposed to Keynes, both of those people like to print money. Keynes printed for another reason. Friedman had another idea. But both of them did like gold. Because they didn't like the constraint of gold on the game. So Friedman was the one who told Nixon, hey, let the free market decide the price of the dollar. Let the free market, let markets will figure it out. You know, that's you know what that is? That slogan sounds so good. It reminds me of another slogan. When you outlaw guns, only outlaws are going to have guns. All right? Great fucking slogan. Great fucking slogan. And that little kid that just shot up somewhere or something was not, doesn't matter. Slogans is what we buy. Slogans is what sells policy. Slogans that encapsulate our deepest fears and emotions. It's what drives us, not consequence. It's what drives us. So what happened?
Yeah, sorry.
So that's what happened. The gold went.
Yeah.
We printed all this debt, and this is where we are now. The difference is this, David. You know, I just wrote a book called Docking to the Mothership. All right. And it touches on the economy today. Well, the book where I got my reputation from, I wrote it in 2007. Here it is.
Yeah. Time of the Vulture.
Time of the Vulture. Okay? Time of the Vulture. Okay?
I keep telling people we're in the time of the ostrich right now.
Oh, yeah. You got it. I like, okay, let me, at least you remember that. Let me,
I've read your books.
okay. This is what, in times of expansion, okay, well, okay, we're in the time of the Vulture. Okay, when I wrote the book.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, it is sorry.
Take your thunder.
No, you didn't.
Okay.
When I wrote the book, when I wrote the paper, I never meant it to be a book. All right. I belonged to this crazy group of people that was put together by my friend from law school. All right. We met in Hastings College of Law in 1966. All right. And Marshall went on to become a lawyer, you know, then I dropped out and became a hippie. All right. And 40 years later, Marshall done a lot of things. Okay. He puts together a group of people that he said were positive deviants, high achieving, unorthodox people, high achievers, but very unorthodox. All right. And Marshall put, the dues were $5,000 a year, 75 to start, but it's $5,000 a year. You meet 4 times a year. And he brought all these people together. There's around 60 or 70 people who did this. And we'd have these meetings and talk about things or whatever. Okay. And so Marshall asked Martha and me to join the group. All right. I mean, you know, we've known him a long time. And he knew how crazy we were, unorthodox. Okay. So we joined this group. And in 2004, he introduces me to another guy in the group. And he says, Daryl, because I've been on this, when you said, when you said ostrich, let me give you the viewers the provenance and origin of those words, Time of the Vulture and the ostrich. In 1991, I'm in prison. The last year of a 10-year prison sentence, doing 7, okay? And there I am. And these words come into my head from nowhere. I mean, or from the blue. These are the words. In times of expansion, it is to the hare the prizes go. Quick, risk-taking, and bold, his qualities are exactly suited to the times. In periods of contraction, the tortoise is favored. Slow and conservative, quick only to retract his vulnerable head and neck, his is the wisest bet, when the slow and sure is preferable to the quick and easy. Every so often, however, there comes a time when neither the hare nor the tortoise is the victor. This is when both the bear and the bull have been vanquished, when the pastures upon which the bull once grazed are long gone, and the bear's lair itself lies buried deep beneath the rubble of economic collapse. This is the time of the vulture. For the vulture feeds neither upon the pastures of the bull nor the stored up wealth of the bear. The vulture feeds instead upon the blind ignorance and denial of the ostrich. The time of the vulture is at hand. 1991, those words come to me out of the blue. All right. I'm in this group that Marshall has put together. And Marshall's known because in the 90s, I started studying economics on my own. I had my own questions and I got answers that made sense to me, deeply sense to me. All right. And living in San Francisco and watching what happened during the dot-com era, on top of that, the bubble that happened in the late 90s. My son had just graduated from MIT in computer science. So he and his friends all moved to San Francisco, and we watched firsthand that huge rush of money. I mean, that made the recent tech boom. It was the precursor to the recent tech boom. I mean, it just, valuations exploded.
Yeah.
Rents exploded. Traffic exploded. Housing exploded. All right. And then it blew up. But because I've been reading about credit and debt and money and stuff, I understood it. I didn't need any pundit to tell me we're going to do it. It all made sense to me. And I knew it wasn't, the context of this was not just the dot-com. The context of this was systemic. The system on which it was based was headed for the drink. All right? I mean, I saw it. So, and I've been telling Marshall this for years. And Marshall didn't want to hear it because he wants it to be positive and good for everybody. You know? But he heard what I was saying. You know? We've been close friends for a long time. So when Marshall put this group together, he introduces me to a guy. He says, Daryl, this is John. He's worried about the economy like you. Now, there's only 6, you know, here we are. We meet 4 times a year. I didn't know who this guy was, but I knew he wouldn't be in the room unless he was somebody, basically. All right. I didn't know that John had graduated from Haverford University in Pennsylvania in 1992 and was immediately hired by Kidder Peabody as a vice president.
Yeah, your timing on that was impeccable.
Yes.
Yeah.
7 years later, John Body has left Kidder Peabody. I mean, to become a vice president right out of you know, your MBA school program.
Mm-hmm.
9 years later, he's in London running the bond desk, part of a team for Deutsche Bank. Okay?
Yeah.
In London. And what happens is, I think it was Deutsche, it was one of the big boys, I'm not sure, but he was in London. He had a team. What I didn't know was, after he had done that, he went to a large French bank, Credit Lyonnais, all right, one of the big 4 in France. And he had an idea for a bond fund.
Mm-hmm.
And he sold the idea to them. For the next 3 years, John Body ran a proprietary bond fund, hedge fund for a bank. It was never traded publicly. Only the bank profited with the bank's money. John's trades were so successful, he was named to the Bond Trader Hall of Fame 2 years later. All right. And he was given the nickname Gentleman John because they said he valued long-term relationships over short-term gain.
Wow.
This is a game that people stab you in the back to make a fortune because fortunes are there for the making. And John had the opposite reputation. I didn't know that not only he had done that, I didn't know that 3 years before he was lecturing the Fed and other central banks on debt. So John had quite a financial provenance. All I knew was when we started talking that Marshall said he was worried about the economy, but I knew he wasn't worried about like I was. I thought we were, but I knew because of John's provenance, I just couldn't say, yeah, we're going to hell in a handbasket, John, because I knew he was in the game. So I began writing an answer to him, for him, basically. And it turned into a 147-page paper that I presented in March 2007 at Marshall's Positive Deviant Album. And I presented what became a book at that time, predicting exactly what you've read in that book. Now, I want to read you, because you'll know this, what it started out with. All right? Because it said this. The first thing is, in the second page of the book, it said, understanding today's complex financial markets. This is 2007. If you can understand your local real estate market, you can understand what is happening to global financial markets. Although mortgages and multiple listings have little in common with derivative swaps and tranches, what collapsed U.S. real estate markets also collapsed global financial markets. Prices of both local real estate and global financial markets collapsed because of rising interest rates. First page in, rising interest rates. What happened last year? 1 year ago, in March, when the Federal Reserve met, they began raising interest rates for the first time since they made them free in the COVID crisis, and printed 4 times as much money as they ever had. Why did they start raising interest rates in the 1 year ago today? 1 year ago to this month. The reason they started raising interest rates, they had to, because for the first time in 20 years, inflation was moving in the US. The Fed had been accommodative monetarily ever since Reagan replaced Paul Volcker with Alan Greenspan. He brought in Greenspan for that reason alone. The boys on Wall Street knew Greenspan would do their bidding, and they didn't have the same feeling about Paul Volcker, who had raised interest rates to 21.5% in 1980. I knew that when he raised that interest rates, David. I had a $400,000 line of credit in my company in 1980 that went from 11%, 2.5 above prime, to 24% in 3 months.
That'll hurt.
I was in liquidation 2 months later. I know what rising interest rates do.
Was anybody jumping out windows?
No, because this was in the 1930s, but a whole lot of people felt like it.
Yeah.
You know, 1980 was nothing compared to the, and I like that you said it, because it was anybody jumping out of windows. People jump out of windows only when it's totally horrific. And the 30s were totally horrific.
Jesse Livermore, the greatest trader ever, shot himself in a coat closet.
And he had made his fortune short selling on the way down. And even then, his luck runs out. I know enough at age 78 that luck ain't forever.
Well, that was one of my questions I had for you. I was saving is, how much of luck is being at the right place at the right time or the wrong place at the wrong time?
It's all luck in the end, because I believe in fate. You know, one of the luckiest persons I ever met, because we all know people who speculate in gold and silver. Okay. You want to buy low, sell high. Huh? And who does it? No one. No one does. Everybody does what they do. Okay.
You said about some guy you met in Italy.
Oh, no, this was a lady I met in Australia.
Australia.
I'm over there giving a talk. This is probably 2011. Austrian economics. Hard money crowd. Australia. 95% guys. All right.
Put the shrimp on the barbie.
Yeah, and they were into gold, silver, and Austrian economics. All right. And this lady comes up during the intermission, and it's wonderful because she was the odd person out. She told me, David, that when remember silver, the Hunt brothers, when they tried to corner the silver market,
$50, right?
Yeah, it went from 2 to 50.
Yeah,
almost. Okay, in a short period of time, within a year or so. Okay,
And
At
still
this
hasn't
time,
and still hasn't gotten back there.
no, it still hasn't got- At this time, she was a dental student. Okay, a dental student, and I don't know why she started doing it, but she started buying silver
Wow.
for whatever reason. Okay, and what she told me, she sold it out at the top.
Wow.
She never became a dentist. When I talked to her in 2011, one of her things was she had an olive oil farm. They grew olives, pressed it, had extra virgin olive oil.
Nice.
Nice.
I wouldn't mind doing that.
No, David, none of us would. But that isn't our lot in life.
Yeah.
What I want to say this, I believe, David, that my life and your life and everybody else's life is already sort of set. The times we grow up in, I don't believe this shit that, we talk about older ages having superstitions,
Yeah.
I believe our modern age will someday be looked upon as being replete with superstitions that were only believed to an extreme degree and in the 21st century at its height. What happened before we moved into this age, we all believe in a God, some did. And even if you believed it, you didn't act like it, most people did. But in the back of their mind, everybody's culture was there was a cause. Okay? Except the Chinese. Chinese don't have an original cause. All right? Which makes them really weird. All right? But everybody else had a cause. Right? The Jews, Yahweh, and we all know that story. Okay? The Mormons, they came along a lot later. All right? But there was an Angel Moroni that told them the story about Joseph Smith, and they had their own origin story. Okay? The Hindus, they got a real old one. All right? Shiva, all these stories. But everybody's got an origin story. And everybody has the one that explains who they are and it came from somewhere. Well, the modern technological age, we became the human mind began to believe itself to be the cause. Humanity looked around and goes, hey, nobody's like us. I don't see anybody better than us. We're king shit. All right. And they moved out of the age of ignorance where the Catholic Church ran everything and made everybody think a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the people who ran the Constitution didn't want the church anywhere near
Yeah. Separation.
the legislature. Because they know what happens when those motherfuckers get in power.
Mm.
Pretty soon, they're telling you what books to read. They're telling you what you do on Sunday because they know the truth. And they're so concerned about your salvation and that you be part of the truth, they're willing to kill you for it. That's human history. It's been that way since history. All right? And they're willing to kill other people who have different beliefs. But anyway, that being what it is, we came into this thing. And I believe that the greatest, let's go back to the hit, because let me tell you how I got shifted out of this. 1966, I'm in law school with Marshall, who puts together this Positive Deviant Network 40 years later, where I ultimately get a forum to put my book together and become known on the public stage as somebody who has got a different view of the economy that gets picked up around the world. 40 years before, Marshall and I were in law school, 1966. All right? Marshall had come from back east, Union College, Phi Beta Kappa, hard driving guy, intense. Me, I'm in there because I just lost if I wasn't in law school, I was going to lose my student deferment. Mm-hmm. My ass was going to end up like all my friends in high school who dropped out of school, dead, fighting a war for a CIA-backed government in South Vietnam in the name of freedom. Bullshit. We knew it. All right. So I ended up in law school at Hastings with Marshall. Okay. And what happens is I take acid that year and I quit going to law school. But before I quit going to law school, Marshall had me write an article for the law school newspaper. All right. January. He was editor of that one edition. and Marshall wanted to change the world, and I was already burned out. I had already seen that. I saw how the odds were stacked against what I believed in. But then I began hit. Like we had no power, none, zero, and whatever power we had, we were trying to save enough so we didn't die in their war. All right, and we couldn't stop the war. So Marshall says, "Now, Darrell, I want you to write an article for the newspaper." Well, I do. I write an article, and I give it to Marshall. Marshall puts the article on the front page of the law school newspaper, Hastings Voir Dire, in January. And this is what it said: church liable for acts of God. You know what this means? This means if you were in Mississippi 2 days ago and a tornado whipped through your house, your area, and took down your gas station that you had, you ran, little gas station, that if you could go, because it's an act of God, no one's liable for an act of God. No one. Now, if somebody went and lit a cigarette and blew up a tank on your gas station, you could sue the motherfucker. All right? But a tornado, no liability. An act of God. A flood, a tornado, a hurricane, a tsunami, no liability. Well, the article I wrote said, you know what? God, being just, would never allow an injustice. And I said, not that injustice don't happen, but not in his name. They're called acts of God. So I said, there's got to be an answer that we haven't figured out. I said, we've got his agents here on earth in this country that are incredibly wealthy. And they're given tax breaks by the government because they are deemed legally agents of God.
Right. Bring the bill to the synagogue.
So they're all of them.
Yeah.
So if you have a natural disaster, you should just be able to total up the damages and go down and hand it to your local parish or your local church or local rabbi or whoever's closest. And they got to ante up.
Right. Please give it to me in 20s and 50s.
Yeah. All right. Well, when Marshall put it out in the newspaper, the dean read it. And he knew if this went out to the alumni, his job would be, he'd get a phone call. San Francisco, for being as liberal as he is, they've got a huge Catholic component. Irish cops, structure. All right. Italians, Catholics too. All right. They ran the goddamn city. And if this went out, he knew he'd get a phone call and his job would be, what the hell are you running over there? So he called the student government in and he said, if this newspaper goes out, I'm shutting down student government. The newspaper never went out.
In retrospect, don't you wish that you printed it?
They printed it, but they never distributed it. No, because you know what? It wasn't going to do any good anyway. David, I know the limits of power. I know the limits of power. All right, and I know, and I no longer look at druthers, like which you pointed out, and you pointed out because you're younger than me. At a younger age, I used to say, druthers. Of course, I wanted druthers. If I could have it another way, of course I could have it. I would want that. If I can have other people think differently than me, of course I would want.
I understand. That's why the wars are fought by the young. I get it.
Exactly.
But I read an article about the Civil War, about how this Texas regiment fought this battle, and they knew that it was unlikely they were going to survive.
Sure.
And they had 100% casualty rate, so all of them were injured or killed. And and so it just drives home that, whether it's right or wrong, they felt strongly about something that they were willing to sacrifice their lives. And
well, Texas was a southern state, and I don't give a fuck what else they were thinking of. They were fighting for slavery.
Well, but
they were fighting for slavery, David. Not in their minds. Not in their mind. Maybe they thought they were fighting for states' rights, but they were fighting for the South.
Well, and I wasn't bringing that particular article up about slavery. I was bringing
I
it
know
up.
you weren't. I brought that up.
Yeah, I was bringing it up because I think that's a component that's missing in people today is where is the outrage? Like, for example, we opened up with Julian Assange. Where's the outrage? Why is that man still in jail?
You know, David, the thing is this. Everybody believes, because everybody has a different perspective, and everybody wishes there were more outrage. Those on the right wish there were more outrage. Those on the left wish there were more outrage. Everybody wishes there were more outrage. Why? Because they believe that if the outrage were sufficient enough, the world would become the way they would like it to be.
Well, you mentioned the golden rule. I wouldn't want to be sitting in some prison for reporting on something that was the truth.
I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying that's good at all. That's not the same thing. I'm saying that, you know, Timothy McVeigh blew up that federal building in Oklahoma to light a fire, to increase the outrage. Okay? That was basically a false flag.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
Now, let's get back to it. And because he felt there was lacking a sense of outrage. All right? Now, in the Revolutionary War.
Well, you know what his mistake was? He killed the wrong people.
Who was the right people?
Bush, Clinton,
There's
the
no way he was going to
politicians.
get. He was no way going to get.
But you can't be killing kids.
No, listen. That's what all revolutionaries think. We got to kill the right people.
Well, if you're going to kill, you got to
I'm
kill
not
the right
saying
people.
there's no right or wrong. I'm saying that's what everybody thinks. Okay? I mean, we know very, I mean, and this is what it is. This is why I am, you know what it is? I'm 78. I know the shit that goes on. And you know, I know it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you read my book, Letter to House Select Committee on Intelligence.
Yeah, well, that's
Norman,
yes.
the story about,
the
about,
guy who had the secret.
Yeah, the guy who had the secret. I know I got firsthand information about the chicanery of money in high places and what they do with it. I believe I know the truth about the Kennedy assassination, at least enough for my thing. I believe I know enough about 9/11 to know more of what happened to most people. All right. And I see what's happening today, David. Mm-hmm. And as we're heading into this, I am at peace with everything. Why? Because I think the resolution that we're going through, the collapse of our present political, economic, and religious institutions, which we see happening, toss in extreme weather events on top of it. I live in a state that we have no water. I mean, we're in a desert. And we've been living off of the Colorado River for decades. And once they invented air conditioning, everybody came here because land was cheap, it was warm, and you could live nice in the winter. And now there's absolutely no water. I mean, there are suburbs in Phoenix that are being cut off from the water supply. And everybody knows this has been coming. But we've been selling more houses in the last 2 years than we did in the previous 10, even though we know it's happening. You can't stop it. I mean, I can't, you can't, they can't, nobody can. And people are saying this is unsustainable. We have been living with unsustainable policies for 40 years. I became aware of global warming in the 80s. Why? In its political implications. Because I was reading at the time that insurance companies in Europe had commissioned a study on what was going to happen if temperatures kept rising. And they saw it. They knew we were going to go to hell in a handbasket. if we kept carbon emissions, if we didn't do anything about it. The fucking Europe knew. And they sort of knew it here. But you know why nobody did anything about it? Because the
Sure, it
money.
had to do with money.
It had to do with money. And
Always
all of a
is.
sudden, they twisted everything, they spun everything, they discredited all the environmental thing. They made them look like fools, idealists, hippies. You know how often that pejorative term is used? Hippies. Hippies. You know, it's not a hippie's revenge because hippies never really look for revenge. But in terms of what's happening, the fact that I, a hippie, having gone through all this stuff, having read all this stuff, having seen all this stuff at my age, seen where it's headed for, and taking refuge, not necessarily in my thoughts, but basically in the thoughts that are best put forward by Buckminster Fuller in his book, Critical Path. In 1981, Buckminster Fuller wrote a piece, a book, that he predicted what was going to happen. It was his advice to humanity on his way out. He was in his early 80s at the time. And he wrote this extraordinary book. And the preface, the introduction to the book was titled Twilight of the World's Power Structure. 1981. Twilight of the World's Power Structures. And he led that off with a quote that said, humanity was entering a period of unprecedented crises. A crisis universally intended by a force that we no longer believe is even real in the superstitions that we are subject to in our modern era. We don't believe that there's any greater force outside of us. We think that's bullshit. We think that's superstition. Bucky said the collapse of our religious, political, and economic institutions is universally intended by cause that's created everything to bring us to our knees and to transform humanity from its present competitive, combative, warlike, scarcity-based driven realities to an interdependent, harmonic whole with a higher standard of living for everyone. That's what he said this crisis is meant to do. Now,
Right.
Bucky
He
wrote.
just didn't say how long it would take.
No, he didn't. But he expected it to happen. But he said, you know, Marshall knew Bucky. All right. He knew him at the end of his life. In fact, Marshall had a seminar for a week long that Bucky was at. It was one of the last week-long events that Bucky was there. Martha was there during the whole time. So was Bob Kiyosaki. Right. That's where Bob had the conversation with Bucky that changed his life. Bob Kiyosaki said, Bucky sat down next to him out of the blue and said, what do you want to do with your life? You know, it's old man in his 80s. There's Bob, 30s, full of vim and vigor, unrealized dreams. And he said, oh, I want to make a lot of money. I want to do things. I want to, you know. And Bucky said, maybe you want to think about humanity. That's what he said to him. And it changed Bob Kiyosaki's life. That's why he wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It was a metaphor for consciousness because of his meeting with Bucky Fuller. Marshall loved Bucky, all right? And in fact, he said, Marshall told me later, he said, he sat down with Bucky once and watched Bucky give away all his money. All his money. He wrote his checkbook down to zero. And Bucky told Marshall he did this every month. Every month. All right. And Marshall joked.
I think of that occasionally. I don't have the courage to do that.
Well, you know what? None of us do. And you know why Bucky had the courage to do that?
Well, because he had a divine intervention.
He was ready to commit suicide. He felt so guilty about his life and what he had done, because 5 years before this event happened, he was going to a football game, a Harvard Yale football game, and his daughter. This is during the first pandemic, this during the Spanish flu, which was a pandemic 100 years before our pandemic. All right, and a lot of people died. His daughter was born during this, and she was born sickly. She didn't die of the flu, Spanish flu, but she had spinal meningitis. She was born sickly. So Bucky, at the age of 27, had gone to this football game, and his daughter said, "Daddy, would you bring me back one of those canes? Those
the pendants.
The pendants.
Yeah.
And he said, "Yeah." So he came back. Harvard won, and he comes back, and his daughter is in a coma. She'd fallen into a coma. She was sickly anyway. And Bucky's there. She's in his arms, and she opens her eyes and said, "Daddy, did you bring me back a cane, the pendant?" And he realized he'd forgotten. And I don't know what he said, but I think he said no. And she died that night. Bucky became an alcoholic after that, started drinking heavily. And he thought his family's life, he had another daughter, would be better off without him. And he was thinking of committing suicide. And that's when he found himself 10 feet in the air, hearing those words, surrounded by light, saying, "What you think is right. And if you take care of humanity, but you have no right to, this isn't your life to kill. This isn't your life." He said, "If you dedicate," the voice said to him, "if you dedicate your life to helping humanity, I will take care of you." And that's what happened. Now, that's why he had that kind of faith. Now, the truth is, you and I and everybody else would like to have that kind of faith, but we don't want to go through that. We don't want to be the one who disappointed our daughter and have her die. But you know what Bucky said about the crisis facing humanity? He said, "If it took a personal crisis to change me, an individual human being, why would it be any less for humanity?" All right. Now, what you asked, David, about luck being at the right place at the right time, what I believe, and I'm going to go back to it because of what happened to me in the Haight-Ashbury in 1966. What really changed my worldview, not only was the LSD, but I'm living in the Haight-Ashbury a year after I drop out of law school. All right. I mean, I'm working at the Family Dogs Avalon Ballroom on Sutter Street, Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, Country Joe and the Fish. They're there Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights. And I've got a food concession there. I've gone from law school to the middle of it. All right. And this hippie in the Haight-Ashbury, it tells me that he wants to do my astrology chart. And I thought astrology was just some of that hippie bullshit.
Bob the candle maker, right?
Yes. And he does my chart. And in the chart, he reads that I'm going to have a conflict with my father. And I mean, I'm 22. I've been fighting with my father for 17 years, and it was going to low for 40 more. The defining relationship in my life. And he says my wife is going to be separated from one of her parents, probably the mother, leaving her feeling very insecure. When I heard that, I knew at a deep level the world was not the way I thought it was. That's what set me off on trying to find out what the world really was, what reality really was. And that predated my questions about money by 20 years. For 20 years, I pursued that question with the same focus that I later did with economics. And just as I came to my own conclusions that were not shared by the general population about money, I came to my own conclusions about reality that were not shared with the general population. And I'm glad that it happened in that manner, David, because if I didn't have that pre-existing context, what is happening now would scare the bejesus out of me. I would have no context to believe that it's going to have a good ending. I would have no framework for seeing a resolution of this that is any way positive. I would
But it's
only
possible, but it doesn't mean, it's like the Bible, right? It never promises happiness in life, just prepares you for salvation. So it could mean that all of us could lose everything in the process.
you know, it may take that. But what I absolutely believe from the firmament of my being is what Bucky said about the crises. It's universally intended that the cause of causes, which we don't believe exists anymore, we don't believe that the God of the Jews is any more real than most of us believe the God of the Christians is real, or the God of the Hindus is real,
Yeah,
or
because
the God of the Buddhists.
we were one of the disciples. We didn't work with them. We didn't see them.
No, we didn't have that belief. And they also had disbelief.
Yeah, and they worked with them.
And they worked with it. Marshall was with Bucky, and he still didn't believe that Bucky said we're going to go through the shitter. He didn't want to. So what I'm saying is, only because of my own particular journey through life, which I've had a lot of very interesting coincidences that happened to me, along with being hung out to dry, I've been incredibly fortunate. All right. When I get busted, I mean, I'm going to go away for a long time. The feds offered to me in 1986 is that if I pled guilty, they'd give me a 20. They'd give me a 20 if I pled guilty. I told my lawyer, that's like in promising to stand still, they'd only shoot below my waist.
Yeah.
And my lawyer told me, Daryl, I can't recommend that you take this in good conscience. And so we didn't. And then a few months later, they offered us 10. And she said, Daryl, if you want to go to court, I'm ready. I'm ready. But if we lose, they're going to hurt you.
And that's the one entity you do not want coming after you.
Yeah. So I pled guilty to the 10. Okay? I pled guilty. And during that 10-year prison sentence, I meditated like a motherfucker, David.
Yeah.
I started meditating the Haight-Ashbury. Oh, money, podme, we're hippies, vegetarians, meditating, that's what we did. But I never meditated like I did when I was on the inside. Never, never, never. And then out of the blue, unexpectedly, I got it. It came. This period where I actually believe what we call enlightenment or liberation. Stunning. I didn't expect it. And then it went away. But it came. Now, I don't know if you know anything about the book called The Power of Now. Do you know about it? Google it.
Yeah,
Google
no. Is that the one written by that woman?
No, that was the Course in Miracles, probably.
Okay.
Yeah, but The Power of Now. Google it. It became a huge bestseller. Okay.
Put a note here.
I found about The Power of Now in 1999 because Marshall, my friend from law school, calls me up. All right. And he said, Daryl, I want you to read this book. I never heard of it. So he said, but I want you to call up Connie. She'll get you a copy of the book. I didn't know who Connie was. Marshall knows a lot of people. He rolls in circles. I don't, I'm a disaffected hippie. All right. So I call up Connie, this Connie Kellogg. Turns out Connie is Eckhart Tolle's first publisher, Namaste Publishing. She published this book in Canada, which was then being sold the U.S. rights to the North American Library and became an international bestseller.
Yeah, it says it's an Oprah book. An Oprah
She picked
selection.
it out later.
Yeah.
That's later. This is 1999 when nobody knew about the book.
Yeah.
It hadn't even been published in the United States yet.
Yeah.
And Marshall tells me to read it. He wanted my opinion on this book. So I start reading the book. The backstory is this. Eckhart Tolle, who wrote the book, was a lecturer at Cambridge. All right? Brilliant and troubled. He said he was so troubled, he was having thoughts of suicide. All right? And he's teaching at one of the top schools in the world, Cambridge. And then he was so bummed out that in a depression that he passed out. And the last thought was, as he passed out, was, I can't stand myself anymore. And the thought that came into his mind after the words, I can't stand myself anymore, were this. Maybe there's two of me. Right? If the words, I can't stand myself, who is the self that can't be stood? And who is this part that can't stand the other self?
Yeah.
He passes out. And the next thing he wakes up, he hears the chirping of a bird. And every time the bird chirped, he saw a light go and dim. Every time the bird chirped, the light went on and contracted. And when Eckhart Tolle became conscious again, he was in a new world. He was absolutely outside that persona that was so afflicted of depression and fear and impotence, helplessness. He had never been there. He wasn't meditating, trying to get there. He wasn't reading spiritual books. He just got so depressed that he cracked. But instead of cracking down, he went up. And he wrote this book called The Power of Now. And what Eckhart Tolle said was this: modern man is trapped in his mind. He's trapped in his mind. And he's trapped between fear and thoughts about the future of what it's going to be and feelings from the past. And he's caught between the two. Even though he's trapped between the past of feelings and a future of thinking. He said, but we're trapped between the two and we never enter the moment because we're either in the past or in the future. And the moment is all there is.
So you're wasting your life if you think of anything else.
Listen to the words that came to me in prison. Will a future that never happens? No. Will a past that ever lingers? And a future that never happens will cause me to wait. I forget how the words were. No. Will a future that never happens determine? Will a past that ever lingers? No. Will a future that never happens be the reason I do what I do today, or the past that ever lingers be the reason I feel this way? Those words reflected exactly what Eckhart Tolle wrote. And what you said was, there's no other way. There's no other way than the rational mind. Because the mind is trapped. But there's a now and a moment that you get out of it. Eckhart got there by falling, not by his own volition. But that was the now I got to, David, when I meditated in prison. I got there. I got there by duress. I got there because prison made me do something I never would have done before. Meditated like a motherfucker. I meditated because I had no way out. I had a 10-year prison sentence, 7 years in with good time. And by meditating with that degree, I got there. I got to a place I never would have on the outside, and I knew it. And then 3 years later, I'm sitting there, and the words about Time of the Vulture come to me, and I write them down. And after I got out of prison, two things. One, I knew at a certain level that the spiritual truths that all these people talked about were absolutely true. When Marshall had me read Eckhart Tolle's book, I knew I had written a few pages that reflected what he thought when I was in prison. One of the things I wrote was, we are eternal lights passing through temporal darkness. We cannot be harmed. We are love itself. Now, David, when that stuff starts coming through you, in you, an economic collapse and a war and all this other shit sort of pales. It's not that it's not horrible, but you have touched the eternal in a way that you never did before. And I did fleetingly for I don't even know how long I was in that state when I was in prison, but I was there. And I didn't tell anybody about it. It's not a kind of thing you go, hey, when you're in prison, you're not going to go, hey, you know what happened to me? You don't talk about it.
Like you said the first time we met, nobody willingly gets off the couch.
Nobody willingly gets off the couch.
Yeah.
And that's how I got forced off the couch. But I was forced off in probably the most benign way possible. I would have chosen that way rather than undergoing what Bucky had to go through.
Yeah, God bless him. I mean, it reminds me of my father. Before he died, he was failing, and I said to him, I said, Dad, I said, if you could, would you end it? And he goes, no. He goes, it's not for me to decide. It's not my.
Your father knew. Your father knew. It's not for me to decide. It wasn't for Bucky. It's not for you. And what I believe, David, is this, in my deepest, deepest soul, is that when I said we are eternal lights passing through temporal darkness, we cannot be harmed. We are love itself. What is going to happen to this planet will not affect us in that deepest sense. It's gonna make us scared shitless about money. It'll make us angry about the way things are going. It'll enrage us about how people are thinking. But we are going to make it through this because of the universe that created this, which one of the common superstitions of our age no longer believes in. I do. I believe it. Why? Because I'm a fool? Because I'm one of those hippies? As they say, only hippies believe this? I am thankful that I went through that. I am thankful that because in that way it prepared me for what we're about to go into. I don't know what's going to happen in particular. I am sure about what's going to happen in general. I know we're going to witness the collapse of the economy. I know we're going to witness the collapse of political institutions, all of them. And I know we're going to witness the collapse of religious institutions. Why? Because Bucky could see the future. I knew Bucky knew about politics. I thought he was a fucking idealist until Marshall made me read that section of Critical Path in which Bucky talked about the 30s and the 40s. And he said, I made sure to keep my predictions over 50 years in the future.
Yeah, so they wouldn't kill him.
So I wouldn't draw the attention of the power structures. I knew, Bucky knew more than I did. And so as we're going into this, David, I go into this with a belief and a hope that is quite at odds with everybody else. I made the joke that when I wrote my first book, Time of the Vulture, I predicted a collapse that nobody believed was going to happen. And as I wrote my second book, Docking to the Mothership, what I believed is I wrote it in the context that everybody knew the collapse was going to happen, but nobody believed we were going to survive it and it's going to turn out better. So in both instances, I'm the odd man out. In both instances, that's who it is. I mean, I remember a conversation that John Exter had with Paul Samuelson about the economy. And Exter was an extraordinary central banker. Exter went to Harvard and got his degree in economics during the Great Depression or after it, because it scarred his generation. All right. And he knew he had a question. What happened during the Great Depression? And when he came out of it, his studies showed him what was going to go on. John Exter became a central banker. John Exter knew Paul Volcker. When Paul Volcker made the decision to cut the ties between the US dollar and gold, and he was head of the Treasury during that time, he had gone to Exter and asked him what he thought we should do. And Exter's advice was devalue the dollar against gold. You don't have the gold to cover, but you can devalue the dollar against gold and keep the golden fetters and keep stability in the system. And Exter looked at, and Volcker looked at him, and this is 1971. And he said, that's possible, but I don't think we have the political will to get it done. So he told Nixon, cut the ties. And that's what happened.
That's when the clock started ticking.
That's when the clock started happening. I told Marshall last week in a conversation with him that when we took the gold out of the monetary system, we pulled the cotter. It's like a cotter pin. Gold was the cotter pin that held it all together. And when we pulled the cotter pin out, that's when it started vibrating. That's when it went like this. That's when it started going. And what we're seeing now is the ultimate end result of taking that cotter pin out. All right. I didn't know there was going to be a Silvergate. I didn't know there was going to be a Silicon Valley Bank. I didn't know Republic Bank was going to go down or be in trouble. I didn't know Credit Suisse was going to fail. But I did know that once you pulled the cotter pin out, something was going to happen. And we're there. But I, unlike most people, David, because of my own personal context, because of my own personal journey, know from the bottom of the heart that it's going to turn out better for everybody, even though we can't see it. And I believe in the eternality of the process in a way I never did before, in a way that I know in my heart of hearts that the DNA of life itself, with all its horror, with all its terror, with all its tragedy, the DNA of life is love. I believe that.
Amen, brother. It's unfortunately, I'm not sure what percentage of the people in our world believe that today.
I believe only a very small percentage do.
I don't even know. Yeah.
But I believe that reality is not left to the whims of the majority. That reality itself, what's really real, was set in motion before we even existed. And it will. And we are only here because of that reality. But we've lost touch of it to such a degree, we as a culture, not only as a nation, but as a culture, as humanity itself, have become dissociated from self. In the beginning of my book, Document of the Mothership, I said, we have become so dissociated from self. When the ego becomes dissociated from that which created, the ego becomes afraid, fearful.
Yeah, that's in your new book, right?
Yes, in my new book.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I read that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't expect.
Yeah, it's with what you referenced on that book, at the end of every video, I don't know if you remember this or even noticed it. End of every video I do, I always put grateful for another great day, because in my opinion, just my opinion, that's all we ever have control over. And if we just focus on that,
It'll
like,
get you.
well,
David.
why worry about 20 years from
David,
now if you're
David,
not
you
doing
got it.
Yeah.
As Eckhart Tolle said, that's beyond. That's all problematical. There's only the moment. And what you said, I mean, David, it's so curious that you said that, because in all the metaphysics I've done, in all the meditation I've done, in all the spiritual reading I've done, I've read shit that no people have never heard of. What you said, be grateful. Listen, I absolutely believe that's the ticket out. That's the ticket out. Count the blessings in the abeyance of anything else. There was something that I want to end it with this.
Okay.
Haight-Ashbury, 1969, coming off of acid. My then wife said these words I never, ever forgot. You can never have it the way you want it, which is not to say it cannot be exactly as you want it. Only you can never own it, for it is only lent and must be renewed with thanks at every moment.
Amen, brother.
And by you saying, be grateful, that sums up what she said, what came through her in those days, at that moment, in one word. Be grateful. And that's what it said. It must be renewed with thanks. And if you can do that, if you can look at the grace that's been in your life, if you can look back at the gifts that have been given to you, your relationship with your father. I know, David, without ever having met you before in person, that your relationship with your father is primary and has been primary. And that your father said that. And that the fact that you end your videos with that. I ended every article I wrote on economics with these words: buy gold, buy silver, have faith. And as I wrote in my first book, of these three, faith is the hardest come by. And I wrote in 2007, better get some now while they're getting still good. But I know that faith is only learned in the trenches. And if you can be grateful, you're going to have that faith, David. I don't believe that you were given that tagline without the certainty that you were going to take that through with you to the other side.
Amen. Yep. Yep. And then, like you said, if you're going to pray or meditate, it's always good to start with what you're grateful for and what you're thankful for.
Absolutely. Because the mind will take you somewhere else if you don't. My mind gravitates to the worst possible scenario almost automatically. All right. It's just what it does. And I used to, when I was younger, it was horrible. The first thought was, what do I do? What can I do? And in my 20s, as misfortune befell me, and I began to doubt myself, I thought, you know what? The only thing I'm really good at is knowing what can go wrong, because it always seemed to happen. I had no idea at that time that because I saw what was going to go wrong, that it would go wrong. It's the deer standing in the highway, fixated on the car, looking at it, that can't move because of the thought is, holy shit, it's going to hit me. That causes the deer to stand there. If there was another thought like, I better get my ass out of here, he would do that. I was like the deer in the headlights. I think that the intervening 50 years has now given me the room to see, wow, there's a car coming. I better do something.
And also, I talk to a lot of people, write to me, a lot of people ask questions, opinions, and I mostly listen. I'll ask questions to have them tell me why, and they will almost always tell me why they can't do something rather than why they can.
Yes, that's what the ego does. The separated self is intent on preserving the separated temporary self. The idea that you can overcome your ego or your should is erroneous. You can't. The ego is our temporary focus in a temporary time. It defines us. But because it's temporary, the ego knows in its heart of hearts that it's only temporary, and that the identity of the temporary self is transitory and is based on fear.
Fear.
It's fear. One of the sayings that I wrote in prison, my fear of the eternal, no, my fear of the eternal led me to the belief that only the temporary was real. Because I was afraid I was going to get obliterated.
Yes,
That the greater self that we come from, the so-called soul, was going to come at the expense of my personal temporary identity.
you
And
hit
I
the nail,
know
you hit the nail on the head. That is probably why most people kill themselves. There are a lot of people kill themselves.
That's it. And I wrote that in my new book in the first few things about the self and the ego and the dissociated self. And I always said that I think my book will become more popular after the crises.
Mm-hmm. When people are looking for answers.
And when people are looking for answers.
Mm-hmm.
And we only ask for answers when we're on our knees. We ask for answers a lot of times, but we only ask the real answers when we're on our knees. That's the only time. That's human nature.
Mm-hmm.
That's human nature. I can't change human nature. I didn't make human nature. I just got to deal with it, my own.
Amen. Believe me, I mean, it's that's it. If I start thinking of all the problems I have, and I mean everything's relative, right? Then you go off the tracks, like you said.
Go off the track.
And so I start by being thankful, grateful, and then if there's truly something that needs to change, Daryl, I tell myself, just like the Chinese, every journey starts with the first step. So start today.
Now, David,
Start today.
I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
What you told me, did you know that 10 years ago?
Which part?
The part of stopping your mind and only thinking about what you can do and be positive? Did you know that 10 years ago?
It's been a process.
Okay.
Probably not 10 years ago, but I've known it for the last couple of years. Absolutely.
All right. All I'm saying is you needed what you've gone through in the last 10 years to come to that conclusion,
right,
to a degree that you would own it.
Right.
All right.
Absolutely.
I would wager to say those last 10 years of what's caused you to reach that conclusion weren't easy.
Pain, baby. Pain.
That's right. And that's what I'm saying is that I know, and I wish it weren't so, but it seems to be so, at least in my case, and in yours, and in Bucky's, that only going through the shitter, the wood chipper, do we find out we're not the tree or the branch or the twig.
They forge with fire, right?
They forge with fire, you know? And I used to, one of my jokes about life is like, we're like on a spit and we're being turned over slowly. No, this is my real, and I've had this metaphor for a long time. That we are in that instrument that people, I don't know, I forget what they call it, but they use them to bring rocks to perfection. They shake them up, they shake it.
Yeah.
And you're left in there until you're perfect. And they'll open up the can and take it out and look at the rocks, and they go, no, you're not right, and they throw it back in. Because they know what's in there, what they're looking for. At this time, David, we only think, fuck, we're in this can that's shaking the hell out of us, and I don't know if I'm going to make it through.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's, I always want to try to, I guess we all walk our own path and there is no one piece of advice. I'm not even sure if saying buying gold and buy silver, if that's the right answer for everybody.
That was the answer. that was the answer that I gave to the people who wanted to buy gold and buy silver. I knew who my audience was. I knew the people who knew in their hearts that this economic system was a charade. And so I said, buy gold, buy silver. And I said, I knew they wouldn't understand by faith, but that's why I said it.
Yeah. Hey, well, I thank you for chatting with us. And, it's like anything. It's you, like you said, you have lived through a different time, so you have seen things from a different angle and from a different perspective. And it's kind of like how, like I might look at young people today who are complaining about difficulties, and I'm like, you don't know difficulties, kid, right? It's like some do, but most don't. And so you've gone through some really extreme situations, historical situations, and that's why it's always good to chat with you about these things. But I think I think that 10 years ago when I started this journey down trying to understand the economic system, I didn't think it was going to take this long, but I think now this is probably the end game, Daryl. This is probably it.
Well, the cotter pin of the monetary system was gold. All right.
Yeah,
and when they removed that in 1971, they pulled the cotter pin out of that. The cotter pin of their mechanism of fiat debt-based money and leveraging it is the banking system.
Yeah.
Now, they saw banks fail in the 30s, and it all went to shit. They saw them failing in 2008, and they rescued them. Well, the amount of money they printed to rescue the system in 2008 led to the crises that we're facing now.
Well, it's a Ponzi. I mean,
It's a Ponzi.
Yeah.
And building more and more and more is only going to extend it until it can't exist anymore. And what I think you're saying is right. We're seeing the collapse of individual banks again, like we see in 2008. All right. They've already printed so much money to save it then. They're going to do so again, but they're doing so against the backdrop of inflation, with the possibility of inflation going into hyperinflation.
It could.
In 2008, when they printed the money, there was no inflation.
Right.
In fact, they were wondering where the inflation was. They knew they had printed more money than they ever had, and there was no sign of inflation. And they began to think, something's wrong here. And then they began to take credit for it. And they called it the Great Moderation. We've done something good somehow. Maybe we hit the secret sauce. Maybe we've done it. We've fixed something. So they called it the Great Moderation. Why it didn't happen then is that they had no idea that the collapse of all these serial bubbles was causing disinflation to happen. Disinflation was destroying money like they were creating it. Disinflation destroys capital, and it wasn't visible. They didn't see it. But every time a speculative bubble happens, it sets in motion disinflationary riptides. So, hyperinflation is in the form of a tsunami. Hyperdeflation is in the form of a fatal riptide that follows the tsunami.
That's what's going to destroy everybody, Daryl. Like you said, every action has a reaction. Every force has a counterforce. And we're going to get, like you said before, we're going to get both. We're going to get hyperinflation, and then what's going to wipe people out is the deflation.
Yes. The person that Grace got me to learn most of this stuff from was a guy named Professor Antal Fekete. And if you'd been around then, he would have seen him referenced a lot. He was head and shoulders above everybody else. And I could barely figure out what he was thinking. Yeah. I was lucky enough just to be around him. And I remember I drove to the airport 2008 in Los Angeles. Marshall had flown the professor in to address the Positive Deviant Network. And I remember telling Antal in 2000, when this happened, 2008, I said, you know, Antal, I don't believe that, or I should have said, I don't understand. But what I tell them is that I don't believe everything you say is true. I really should have said, I don't understand, because that was the basis of my disbelief. All right.
My
But
brain I can't wrap my brain around it.
Yeah, yeah. And I told Antal, I said, I put in those words, I don't believe everything you say is true, but I'm not the person to quibble with you. All right. I'm not that person. And Antal wrote about hyperdeflation. And he said, hyperdeflation is measured by the velocity of money. And what happens is it becomes so low, it will destroy everything that credit has built, that hyperinflation creates, that inflation creates. And if you go back and look at the velocity of money, after 2008, the velocity of money dropped below where it was at the depths of the Great Depression, even after quantitative easing. That's like just pouring plasma into a dying body.
Yep.
The economic body was dying.
Yep.
And the
was
blood
getting
pressure was
destroyed,
so
yeah.
low, they had to put in quantitative easing and printing money and 0% just to keep anything circulating. But the only thing that was circulating was the essential organs. The body economic itself, it was below the level even during the Great Depression. And then now it's even lower.
Amen.
Now
Yeah,
even
yeah. It's
it never
thank you very-
recovered.
no. Like you said, all it was just a delaying action.
It was
Because
a
let's
delay.
face it, if you were 65 back in 2001, you buy another 20 years. Who gives a shit?
Who gives a shit? Well, they did that
Yeah.
hoping an answer would come. They did that. The Milton Friedman's helicopter drop of money came to him in the 70s in his brain. And he thought if we had expanded the monetary supply sufficiently during the 30s, the Great Depression never would happen. Well, that's in theory. Well, his acolyte, his Chila, Ben Bernanke, got up during one of Friedman's last birthdays and said, Professor, if we had followed your advice, we wouldn't have had the Great Depression. And because you gave us advice, we're never going to have another depression. Well, Ben Bernanke had the chance to institute the helicopter drop of money in 2008, 2009. And he was chairman of the Federal Reserve when he dropped the helicopter drop of money. And it didn't work. And they did it even in greater sums in 2021 after COVID.
But this time they put it right into people's hands.
Yeah, and it still didn't work, measured by the velocity of money. It worked temporarily. Yeah. It worked at the level that you and I and everybody else lives on.
They went out and bought trucks, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the system. Yeah, we all bought trucks, right? And the price of real estate went up by 40% in the last 2 years. All right, but measured by the velocity of money, it didn't budget. It was a little blip, and then it went down again. So that's where we're at. And that's why if I didn't have the faith that I have by going through what I went through, if I didn't have that experience in prison meditating like a motherfucker, all right, to really know that what all those people meditated said was true, I wouldn't believe it. And still a part of me doesn't believe it.
Well, you're not running to stand still, though, right? I mean, I don't mean to, I'm not discounting any actions of what you took, but because of the generation you're in, is like people who are like 30, 20, 30, like, yeah, like you have grandkids, right?
Yeah.
What are they, around 20?
No, my son is
He's like my age, right?
he's your age.
55,
He's 50. Yeah, he was
55.
born in 73.
Okay.
Okay, so he's 51. And he grew up in an era of unfettered credit. And not only did he grow up in the era of unfettered credit, he majored in computer sciences,
Mm-hmm.
which was the source of both those bubbles.
Mm-hmm.
The dot-com bubble that burst in 2000 and the tech bubble that burst in 2022. So his generation came up through both of those and rode that bubble.
Mm-hmm.
And to them, that bubble, in everything was real. I mean, his whole generation rode that, and it popped last year. My grandkid, his son, is 5 years old,
Oh, just 5.
just 5.
Boy,
All
what
right.
is he? Yeah. Well, he's not old enough to worry about it yet.
No, no, no. But his parents are.
Yeah.
Because they're tech people. Benjamin has his BA in political in computer science from MIT. Our grandson's mother graduated from Yale with a PhD in physics
Oh boy.
and a master's in computer sciences. So he is the progeny of these two people in the tech industry, which is on its heels right now, as everything is. But what I believe, David, that I didn't believe 50 years ago, when it's going to turn out all right, not only for him and not only for his parents, but for you and for everyone else that's going to go through this, because something had to change. And we had to change before it changed, because reality is a reflection of ourselves. It's a mirror of where our heads are at. And we, in the 20th century, got so far off base. What we're experiencing is a reversion to the mean in a cosmic sense. Is a return to what's real when we've been absolutely enmeshed in what the Hindus called Maya, the illusion. In the 20th century, we thought the only thing was real was that which is physical, that which could be counted, perceived, sensed, and felt, and the rest was bullshit. What we're about to find out is not all of it was bullshit. A lot of it was, but not all of it. And what we thought was real, the only thing was real, is transitory. That's the bullshit. And it's going to take a crisis for us to know that, and we are going to know that. And it's coming. And what I came to me in those years is absolutely true. All of us, my grandson, my kids, you, people who are seeing this or listening to it, and those who aren't, all of us are eternal lights passing through temporal darkness. We cannot be harmed. We are love itself.
Amen. And also, it doesn't mean, and I suppose this is where you got to push the fear away. It means that half the population, their time might be up on Earth.
Well, that's inevitable anyway.
Well, I know, but I'm saying,
yeah, soon, by another mechanism.
Right.
By another mechanism. By another mechanism. We're coming to the end of a chapter. We're coming to the end of a book. We're coming to the end of a series. And another series is about to begin. About to begin. And the form that we're in always passes away. whether or not it's your physical form during your incarnation. I know the Hindus were right. I know the hippies were right about reincarnation. Before, I thought it was hippie bullshit. Now, I believe that hippie bullshit.
All the best to you. And I look forward to the next time we talk.
Okay. Good
And,
luck, David. And
hey,
keep
you
that
too.
gratitude going. Keep being grateful. It's your ticket through.
Every day, my friend. It's why I do what I do. All the best.
All
Take
the
care.
best.